Chapter 822. Stay here if you want to. After all, the shockwaves alone can kill a lot of people when the fight really breaks out. If you're not afraid of death, do you think we're afraid of killing you by mistake? We really don't mind at all. However, after waiting for a few more days, and there was still no movement, the Four Seasons Tower finally lost their patience. They sent someone to investigate. The scout flew out anxiously, searching everywhere like a bolt of lightning. It was only after he had traveled a third of the distance that he saw Yin-Yang leisurely strolling over on the path below. At that speed, he would only be able to cover a few hundred miles in a day. Compared to a third of the total distance, he would have to walk for at least another 10 days. What was even more infuriating was that he clearly had a rare horse by his side, but he just didn't ride it. Instead, he led the horse along the way. Seeing this, the Four Seasons Tower's expert was infuriated. We're waiting for you over there, hoping for you. But here you are, leading a horse with one hand and a beauty with the other, so leisurely. May I ask if you're walking the horse, or flirting with the girl? It doesn't look like you're in a hurry to meet the duel. Yin-Yang was climbing a mountain with Ji Lingxi, admiring the beautiful view of the rolling clouds from the top of the mountain, when he heard a strange sound coming from the sky. A black-clothed man fell to the ground like a meteor. His momentum was not small at all. The newcomer glared at both of them. Lord Supreme Cloud, what do you mean by this? From the tone of his words, it was obvious that the newcomer was from the Four Seasons Tower. Yin-Yang rolled his eyes. What is it? We've agreed to settle our grudges at Tianxian Cliff 3 days later. But Lord Supreme Cloud, you're still not there yet. What do you mean by this? The man in black was furious. Have you forgotten the agreement, Lord Supreme Cloud? Yin-Yang replied matter-of-factly. How can I forget? How can I forget the duel I set myself? My memory is definitely better than yours. You're worrying too much. The man in black said angrily. Then why are you still here? A man's words are meant to be kept, and a man can't stand without his word. I didn't expect Lord Supreme Cloud to go back on his word. Do you think you're a man of your word? Yin-Yang replied. Go back on my word? Don't you think your words have gone too far? The man in black replied. Up until today, Lord Supreme Cloud, you've exceeded the agreed time limit by a whole 9 days. It was supposed to be 3 days later, but now it was already the 12th day. I wonder how Lord Supreme Cloud would justify himself. Yin-Yang said slowly. Look, you know that I said 3 days later that day. Isn't it 3 days later now? The man in black, Yin-Yang said. Whether it's the 12th day later or the 13th day later, it's still 3 days later. I remember the battle 3 days later. I dare not forget it. However, as for which day it will be 3 days later, it's up to me, the one who made the agreement, to decide, not you. That's how it should be. What's self-justifying? Isn't that what the logic says? The man in black was so angry that he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. His entire body trembled as he gritted his teeth and hissed, Shameless! Shameless! Utterly shameless! I didn't expect the 9 Supremes Supreme think tank to be such a shameless person. How insane! It's infuriating. Yin-Yang said faintly. All of you are uncultured and have misinterpreted my words. Who can you blame for waiting in the same spot like idiots? Now you're trying to turn the tables on me. How preposterous. Why do you look so angry? Do you really want to teach me a lesson here? You can come down then. I'll teach you anytime. The man in black was panting heavily, his eyes almost popping out of their sockets. However, asking him to come down and fight to the death with Yin-Yang. What a joke. The cultivation base of both Yin-Yang and the girl in front of him was unfathomable. I'd be courting death if I went down alone. Do you really think I'm stupid? I'm so angry that I'm about to die, but I still have to treasure my own life. The man in black held his breath and said, According to Lord Supreme Cloud, doesn't that mean that 3 years later also belongs to the category of 3 days later? Is this the deeper meaning of Lord Supreme Cloud's words? Yin-Yang replied calmly, You're right. You've become smart in an instant. You're worth teaching. You're worth teaching. The man in black was so angry that he was rendered speechless. Encountering such a shameless person, especially when he could not be reasoned with. What should he do? What could he do? Fortunately, Yin-Yang continued, It's a pity that this duel is destined to not drag on for so long. How can I allow all of you to live for another 3 years? Wait patiently, I'll go straight ahead. Look at the distance, there's not much time left. Don't be impatient. I'll give you one last piece of advice. Don't be surprised, let nature take its course. The man in black felt like his liver was about to explode from anger, on the verge of breaking down. Yin Yang said, "Remember to tell Mr. Nian when you go back that those who do great things must have patience. While there's still time, all of you can still perfect the spiritual restraining formation, linger on with your last breaths, and enjoy life for a few more days. I'm doing this for your own good. When the day of the duel comes, your souls will be dead, and you won't have the chance to enjoy life anymore." Without another word, the man in black turned into a gust of black air, and left at a speed much faster than when he had come. He really could not stay any longer. If he were to let Yin Yang say a few more words, he felt that his organs would explode without Yin Yang even having to do anything, and he would die right there and then. He would really die of anger. What a pity! Yin Yang and Ji Lingxi spoke in unison. If this fellow could not hold back his anger and charged down to fight, how wonderful would that be? Ji Lingxi would step forward and activate the red light to counteract the attack, and she would be able to cripple this fellow right here and now. Without a doubt, she would be more than happy to chop off one of Mr. Nian's arms. However, she did not expect this fellow to be so tolerant, to make a prompt decision and gallop away. Let's continue forward. I remember that after this valley, the scenery there is not bad. On one side is ice and snow that hasn't melted for years, while on the other side, there are actually hundreds of flowers blooming. It's a marvelous and breathtaking sight. Really? Come, let's go. Let's go quickly. Don't miss out on such a beautiful view. Ji Lingxi was overjoyed when she heard that, pulling Yin Yang along as they ran. Reddy snorted and followed them unwillingly. Yin Yang was helpless against this fellow who had chased after him despite being thousands of miles away from Tiantang City. Stroking the horse's mane, he said, "Reddy, I'm leaving in a few days. What do you think you're going to do?" Reddy snorted and rubbed itself against Yin Yang's body intimately. The meaning behind it was indescribable. Yin Yang sighed to himself. In these few days, Yin Yang had combed Reddy's meridians many times and fed it plenty of treasured resources. He had even squeezed out half a bowl of his blood for this fellow to drink. In spite of this, the only result was that this fellow was becoming more and more inseparable from him. Yin Yang could not make up his mind regarding such a spiritual, unparalleled treasure. What should he do? Release it into the forest? Or leave it on the battlefield? Would it be possible if he brought it away from this world? Chapter 823. However, he had to admit that the chances of him using a warhorse in the future would be fewer and fewer. Perhaps there would be none at all. However, Reddy was so reliant on him now. If he were to disappear, Reddy might do something stupid, because it could not stand the loneliness and coldness. Such a spiritual steed would only acknowledge one master in its lifetime. It was not the first time that a steed was buried with its master when it passed away. No matter what, Yin Yang did not wish to see such a thing happen. Reddy was unusually happy to be able to stay by its master's side. Sometimes, it would run around happily, sometimes bringing a brightly colored flower to present to Yin Yang. Sometimes, it would rub itself against Yin Yang's side, from left to right, its shiny tail whipping around, as if it wished it could be a horse that stuck to Yin Yang. Sometimes, it would stop at the peak of the mountain and whinny into the sky, recreating the elegance of a king of horses. Ji Lingxi was not disgusted by Reddy's obsession. It was not only Yin Yang, but Reddy was also trying its best to please Ji Lingxi. He didn't seem to realize that his master would leave him after this battle. This alone made Ji Lingxi exceptionally fond of Reddy. The crux of the problem now is, what will happen to Reddy if we enter the bound of universe? Where will it go? Yin Yang asked Ji Lingxi, his heart filled with melancholy. Ji Lingxi's hand that was caressing Reddy stopped abruptly. She was stunned, because she also realized that this reality might bring about future troubles. And this future trouble was extremely serious. And there was a high possibility that it would happen. Can't you bring Reddy along with you? Although Jilingxi's cultivation base was profound, her state of mind was far too lacking. She panicked at the moment of enlightenment. Honestly, I want to bring Reddy along, Yunyang said slowly. But that's not a good thing either. Reddy's happiness is based more on this worldly world. It can roam freely and display its elegance as a king of horses. If it were to be taken away by force, it would still not be happy. It would be depressed and unhappy for the rest of its life. The level of the bound of universe is far higher than that of the Tianxian continent. It is foreseeable that there would be so many experts there. Perhaps, a cultivator with a slightly higher cultivation base would be able to fly faster than Reddy at full speed. Moreover, he would be able to fly through the air without any obstacles. Under such circumstances, how could Reddy be happy? It's the best steed in the world, a fine horse. Its own speed is the root of its existence. If it doesn't have this special ability, it won't just be depressed. It'll also be filled with grief and resentment. What good will that do it? This kind of precious steed is only suitable to exist in a secular world, like the profound sky continent. If it were to head to the Xianhuang world, it would lose all of its pride and die a lonely death. Yin Yang sighed softly. Rather than that, I'd rather leave it here and let it roam freely, enjoying its life. It wants to join the war and gallop on the battlefield, so I asked Fu Baogua to take care of it. If it wants to be free and be the king of all the horses in the world, I will let it go and give it freedom without any restraints. I don't want it to be unhappy. It doesn't want to take the slightest risk, what's more, the foreseeable bad atmosphere. Jilingxi said. But it obviously sees you as its only owner now. It won't be happy without you. It will still be depressed and lonely. Yin Yang said in a low voice. At least it won't die. If it were to go to the bound of universe, it would definitely die after losing all its pride. It would be a sad death too, without any dignity as a king. Jilingxi looked at Reddy, who was playing around, and said, Not necessarily. With us taking care of it, how could it die? Yin Yang said profoundly, What I'm trying to say is that it's a king. A king among horses is also a king. Once a king's dignity is profaned, how can a king continue to exist? It's the same for humans and horses. Humans might even drag out an ignoble existence, hoping for a future. The world of horses is too simple. Once its dignity is lost, that will be its end. With a long neigh, Reddy galloped over from afar, holding a beautiful red flower the size of a bowl in its mouth. It raised its head to deliver it to Yun Yang. Yun Yang took it, and Reddy nudged Yun Yang's hand with its head again, moving towards Jilingxi. Yun Yang chuckled. You want me to give this flower to her? Reddy shook its head and tail in a leisurely manner, carefree and happy. Yun Yang delivered the red flower to Jilingxi with both hands. Jilingxi accepted it with a blush, and hugged Reddy to give it a kiss. Reddy was so happy that it jumped 30 feet before it turned into a red shadow and sped away. Jilingxi was even more reluctant now. Yun Yang, Reddy seems to have sensed something. Yun Yang felt a pang in his heart as he said, Reddy is already a psychic existence now. It can definitely sense something, so it's releasing itself to the fullest, leaving behind the most beautiful and memorable memories that it's willing to see. In the next few days, Reddy grew more and more excited. It came and went like the wind, never leaving the two of them. Yun Yang had a clear feeling that Reddy was trying to please him, trying to make him happy. Perhaps it was trying its best to make him stay. Or perhaps it wanted to make both of them happier in their last moments together. Yun Yang and Jilingxi walked slower and slower. The distance they covered dropped from a few hundred miles a day to less than 100 miles, perhaps even less. In these few days, Yun Yang would travel thousands of miles from time to time to retrieve fresh pasture. He would even grind the eastern amethyst into powder and mix it with the grass, feeding it to Reddy. Reddy ate it with relish, wagging its tail happily as it ate. The atmosphere was joyous. However, Yun Yang realized that the massive amount of spiritual qi that could make an ordinary cultivator explode did not seem to have much effect on Reddy. It was just chewing on the spiritual qi, as if it was munching on ordinary grass. Out of curiosity, Yun Yang fed the eastern amethyst to Reddy for every meal. Therefore, Reddy had eaten 7 to 8 pieces of eastern amethyst in total. If Ling Xiaozue and Duga Cho were to see this, the two bosses would probably go crazy. They might even fight Yin Yang to the death. This was the Eastern Amethyst. Boss, don't be so wasteful. We only have a few pieces, and you're actually adding food to the horse every meal? What happened to our friendship? However, this was not the only waste. Yin Yang squeezed out some of his own blood and smeared it on the fodder, just like how he had tempted Reddy back then, feeding it to Reddy. Chapter 824. However, this morning, when Yin Yang fed Reddy the grass that he had prepared, Reddy munched on it, looking like it was the day before. However, Yin Yang was acutely aware that 2 drops of tears were slowly forming in Reddy's eyes. Although it was slow, it finally landed on the grass with a plop. It was swallowed by Reddy immediately. If Yin Yang had been careless, he would have missed it. Yin Yang felt his heart tremble violently. At that moment, an inexplicable sourness and loss grew within him. It was hard to suppress and impossible to calm down. Yin Yang straightened up abruptly, looking at the Tianxian cliff that could be vaguely seen from afar. For a moment, he felt a surge of emotions that he could not describe. It was an indescribable feeling that was surging within him. After Reddy finished eating the fodder, it, who had always been cheerful these days, suddenly felt a little tired. The horse rubbed its head against Yin Yang for a long time, not letting him leave. It even placed its head in Yin Yang's embrace. Just like that, it allowed Yin Yang to hug it and fell asleep peacefully. Yin Yang hugged Reddy, his expression solemn. Jilingxi leaned against Yin Yang's side considerately, leaning against Reddy as well, resting quietly together. At that moment, the 2 humans and the horse seemed to have become one. Under the morning sun, they seemed to be dyed with a layer of golden radiance, extremely dazzling. On this day, Yin Yang and Jilingxi did not move a single step, staying on the peak for the entire day. When dusk covered the earth, Hong Hong finally woke up. Standing up with a flip, it shook the mane on its body and neighed towards the sky. The momentum of this long hiss was earth-shattering. There was an indescribable drawn-out aura, and the mane all over its body seemed to be on fire. It lowered its head and rubbed itself against Yin Yang's leg, his hand, his chest, and even his head intimately, just like how it used to do in the past. Then it whined softly and rubbed itself against Jilingxi's body as well. Then, it began to look for grass by the side, its tail swishing as if nothing had happened. Jilingxi asked, "When are we leaving?" Yin Yang answered quietly, "Tomorrow morning." That night, Yin Yang took out a lot of ingredients from his space, and both of them worked together to prepare a sumptuous banquet. He even took out a pot of wine and drank with them. To everyone's surprise, Hong Hong also drank 3 big bowls. It was so happy that it raised its head to the sky and let out a long neigh that shook the valley. It was late at night. Yin Yang and Jilingxi seemed to have fallen asleep. Hong Hong, who was lying on the side, quietly stood up. Its eyes glowed crimson in the darkness, staring longingly at Yin Yang's face. Cautiously, it stuck out its tongue and licked the corner of Yin Yang's clothes. It then took 2 steps back and stared at Yin Yang's face for a long time without moving. Her big, round eyes were gradually filled with tears, and finally, they fell one by one in a string. After a moment, it turned around slowly, as if it was afraid of startling Yin Yang. It retreated about 70 to 80 feet away quietly, and with a sudden turn, leaped into the darkness, leaving swiftly and soundlessly. In the blink of an eye, it had already gone to a peak several miles away. It was the tallest peak in the area, much higher than the peak where Yin Yang and Jilingxi were. Hong Hong stood tall on the peak like a torch, its head held high and its chest puffed out. It turned its head abruptly, still looking longingly at the direction where Yin Yang and Jilingxi were resting. It did not move for a long time. The night wind was chilly. Hong Hong's mane danced wildly in the wind, but it did not move at all, as if it had turned into a beautiful statue. After an unknown amount of time, Hong Hong finally turned its head slowly and retracted its longing gaze. It lowered its head and whimpered softly. Its hooves stomped restlessly on the mountain top, as if it was hesitating. It really wanted to run back to its most favorite, warmest master, and relive the tenderness and unwillingness to part with him. The longing that was hard to part with. In spite of this, its tears did not return even after they had flowed to the bottom of its feet. Then it finally turned and left. This time, like a bolt of red lightning, it headed straight for the dense forest and did not look back. Early in the morning, Jilingxi woke up from her dream. She opened her eyes in a daze and realized that she was leaning against Yunyang, her head resting on his shoulder. She could not help feeling shy and sat up quickly. Looking around, she realized that something seemed to be missing. It was only after some time that Jilingxi reacted. Her eyes darted around and she murmured, "Where's Hong Hong? Has it gone out to look for food?" Yun Yang's deep voice was tinged with an indescribable emotion as he said, "Hong Hong has left." Left? Jilingxi stood up with a swoosh and cried out involuntarily, "Why has it left?" Yun Yang closed his eyes and said, "Hong Hong is a spiritual plant of creation. We didn't even think of bringing it along when we left this time, but it chased us all the way from Tiantang City to here as a horse. We've known each other for a long time now. There's no need to express it in words. Actually, I knew then that Hong Hong had sensed that I was about to leave, and that it would be difficult for us to meet again. That's why it chased after me without a care in the world, wanting to bid farewell to me. Along the way, it tried its best to be obedient, circling around us. No matter what I gave it, it ate it. Whether it liked it or not, it ate with all its might." Yun Yang's eyes were closed. His voice was flat and without a hint of emotion. In spite of this, Jilingxi could sensitively feel that Yun Yang's heart was surging with waves of emotions. What it wants is nothing more than a happy time together at the end. Now we're almost at Tianxian Cliff. It knew that it couldn't follow us anymore, so it left quietly in the middle of the night last night. Yun Yang closed his eyes in a melancholy manner. What lingered before his eyes was the sight of Hong Hong standing on a faraway peak and looking back at him. The bitterness in his heart was indescribable. "Goodbye, Hong Hong. I'll miss you." Yun Yang heaved a long sigh, feeling a boundless melancholy. "I only wish for you to be happy, free and unrestrained. When I return to Tianxian, I'll look for you at once, feed you, gallop with you, and be filled with endless joy." In front of Tianxian Cliff, Yun Yang came fluttering in his purple robe while Jilingxi, who was dressed in white, had finally arrived. As the two of them walked, it was as if they were a match made in heaven. The man was handsome, elegant, while the woman was an outstanding beauty, graceful. However, when they arrived near Tianxian Cliff, Yun Yang's expression changed abruptly. His deific consciousness had sent him a very serious question. Why is Fu Baoguo's Eastern Border Army here? Judging by the scale, he's obviously mobilized the entire eastern border. What's he trying to do? Looking at the densely packed military camps in front of him, and the flags fluttering in the air, Yun Yang was overwhelmed with shock. As requested by the chief of Sea Soul Clothes, I'm recommending a book, The Shallow and Lousy Continuing the Flame. It will be available on the 1st of August. I hope that brothers and sisters who are capable will subscribe. Chapter 825. Yun Yang was dumbfounded. What was going on? What was the Eastern Border Army doing here? Both of them approached swiftly. "Greetings, Lord Supreme Cloud." The sentinel kneeled down to pay his respects with eyes filled with fervor, his voice loud enough to tear through the clouds. The entire base was plunged into an unprecedented commotion after this announcement. Then, a deafening horn sounded. The general's assembly drum sounded as well. Within moments, Fu Baoguo had led more than 400 military officers of various ranks and swarmed over. Arriving at the camp gate, these 400 men turned around and knelt in unison. This lowly general, Fu Baoguo, has led 400 men of the eastern border to pay our respects to Lord Supreme Cloud. May Lord Supreme Cloud prosper and vanquish all those who dare. Brothers, please rise, Yun Yang said hurriedly. Our brothers have shed blood on the battlefield and fought hundreds of battles for Yutong. How can I be worthy of such a grand greeting from you brothers? Please don't kill me. Rise quickly, all of you rise. It's just that. Marshal Fu, what are all of you up to? Why are all of you here? Are you giving up on the eastern border and the fortress of resilience? Yun Yang asked in an odd tone. Fu Baoguo laughed and said, Don't worry, Lord Supreme Cloud. We've come to Tianxian Cliff under His Majesty's order. His Majesty has given a death order. Even if all 400,000 men of the eastern border die here, Lord Supreme Cloud is not allowed to meet with any mishap. We must protect Lord Supreme Cloud. Yin Yang was shaken. Is this true? Fu Baoguo replied. How can it not be true? Otherwise, this lowly general wouldn't have dared to act on his own. Of course, before I left, I've laid down a strategy to guard the place. Even if Dongxian were to invade, it's impossible for them to breach the Fortress of Resilience in a short amount of time. Besides, Dongxian has just been defeated and Yutong has the power to unify Tianxian. Dongxian probably won't dare act recklessly. Yin Yang heaved a deep sigh. I'm grateful for His Majesty's hospitality, but there's no need for this. Marshal Fu, this duel with the Four Seasons Tower is within the martial world's grudge. There are countless hidden reasons within. I'm not saying that all of you can't help me here, but it's not necessary. Fu Baoguo replied. The imperial edict has been issued. This lowly general dare not defy it. Please do not make things difficult for this subordinate, Lord Supreme Cloud. What a beautiful way to put it. I'm carrying the imperial edict. If you don't let me help you, you're asking me to defy the edict and die. How could you do this? Even if you're Supreme Cloud, you can't do this. Yin Yang could not help falling silent, knowing the truth behind the other party's words. Looking at the fanatical and determined expressions of the people around him, how could he not know that it was useless to persuade them? A surge of warmth flowed from the bottom of his heart, his emotions surging. It was beyond Yin Yang's expectations that the emperor would issue such an order. 400,000 soldiers were guarding Yutong's gateway, the Fortress of Resilience. The position was of utmost importance, but the emperor had actually given such a resolute order. He would rather give up the gateway and put the empire at risk to protect himself. Strictly speaking, this was actually a random order. However, the Eastern Line's defenders just happened to accept the order and came over happily. They all displayed a will that didn't care about death. It couldn't be said that this was not absurd. In spite of this, when it came to Yutong's god, the Nine Supremes think tank, Supreme Cloud, Yin Yang, it was a win-win situation. Since the emperor has decreed so, Yin Yang shall not make things difficult for Marshal Fu. However, I still have a request. Lord Supreme Cloud, please speak. I will do my best. In order to avoid any accidental injuries during the battle, General Fu, please give the order for all the troops to retreat 20 li according to the original formation. After the battle breaks out, if there are any major movements, retreat at least another 20 li at the right time. Fu Baoguo thought about it and said, Sure. Baoguo will definitely wait for the right opportunity. I won't sacrifice myself for nothing. Thank you very much, Marshal Fu. Lord Supreme Cloud, please take care. You are Yutong's sky. Following Fu Baoguo's military order, Yutong's eastern frontline army retreated in unison. There was not a hint of chaos in their movements. Amidst their movements, they roared in unison. Lord Supreme Cloud will win. Lord Supreme Cloud will win. Hundreds of thousands of people cheered in unison, their voices surging into the sky and tearing the clouds apart. The sky changed color as the wind blew, and the clouds surged. Yin Yang strolled leisurely into the mountain gate of Mount Tianxian, stepping onto the winding path that had appeared countless times in his dreams. Even the moss on the rocks was so familiar to his eyes. Yin Yang plucked a stalk of grass from the side of the road and placed it before his eyes. There were faint red patterns on the stalk of grass, as if the blood of his brothers that day had not completely dissipated, but had merged into the grass and trees of this mountain. I'm here, Yin Yang said softly. This grudge has been going on for almost 3 years. Brothers, are you all impatient from waiting? A faint voice rang out slowly. Are your brothers impatient from waiting for Lord Supreme Cloud to descend to the underworld to ask them personally? But we are indeed impatient from waiting. Yin Yang lifted his head to look at a silhouette floating among the clouds and said with a smile, Perhaps all of you are tired of living. Can I understand it this way? The silhouette in the clouds smiled faintly and said, Who was the one who set this challenge, and who was tired of living? Everyone knows it very well. Different people have different opinions, that's all. Yun Yang laughed and said in a chilling tone, "Where's Mr. Nian? Is he here?" The person in the clouds smiled faintly. "Today's battle is crucial. Of course the leader is here. He will fulfill Lord Supreme Cloud's last wish." Yin Yang's voice spread slowly and uncontrollably. "Mr. Nian, why don't we have a talk before the final battle? I believe that you have a lot of questions in your heart as well. I'm not the only one. There are many things that I don't understand as well. I want to clarify everything." A moment later, an elegant voice that was tinged with a hint of a smile rang out from the top of the mountain. "Of course I dare not ask. Since Lord Supreme Cloud is in the mood, I shall accompany you. Why don't we have a talk at the top of the mountain?" The elegant voice paused and continued. "There's another residence of 9 Supremes at the top of this mountain. I believe Lord Supreme Cloud won't forget about it. Let's talk there, and let the spirits of the 9 Supremes hear the whole story. This way, be it the realm of the living or the realm of the dead, everyone can understand the truth. They can leave with no regrets and stay with no doubts. Isn't that great?" Yin Yang's eyes glinted with deep hatred as he said, "Very well. I have the same intention. It's a deal." Once he finished speaking, he ascended the stairs in a leisurely manner. Jilingxi, who was by Yin Yang's side, had already mustered her lifetime's cultivation base. A vast aura that was strong enough to look down on the world echoed in the forest. With her current formidable cultivation base and thick deific consciousness, she had long sensed that there were more than 20 superb experts lying in ambush on this small mountain top. Each of them was at a similar level to Ling Xiaozui and Du Guichou. Such a lineup was simply terrifying. What kind of people were Yun Yang's enemies? Why were they so strong? Chapter 826. You don't have to be so careful. Even if I'm going to die today, Mr. Nian will definitely wait for me to finish talking before he starts the ambush. Because there are some things that have puzzled him for a long time, and he desperately wants to know the answer. Jilingxi nodded, but it was still difficult to dispel her anxiety. Knowing that there were endless dangers ahead, how could he really relax? How big of a heart did he have to have? As she ascended the mountain step by step, an indescribable sense of oppression seemed to have been built in the air for a long time. It made him feel inexplicably uncomfortable. "This is the spirit restraining array," Yun Yang explained with interest as he walked. "This is the Four Seasons Tower's usual tactic. Back then, they used the spirit restraining array to seal off our ability to transform to the greatest extent, so we could only use our physical strength to fight them. That was also the reason for our tragedy." Yin Yang's voice was unusually calm as he spoke plainly, without the slightest hint of emotion. Jilingxi asked worriedly, "Huh? Then can you still?" Yin Yang smiled and said, "It doesn't matter whether I can or not. I'm no longer the person I used to be. They can't do anything to me." Both sides scoffed at the same time, obviously disdainful of what Yin Yang had said. Yin Yang ignored the jeers and continued to ascend the mountain slowly, as steady as ever. In spite of this, the murderous intent and malicious intent from both sides came crashing in waves. It was obvious that the Four Seasons Tower's experts wanted to use this opportunity to frustrate Yun Yang. They wanted Yun Yang to lose his edge before meeting Mr. Nian. However, Yun Yang was unperturbed, ignoring it as if he did not see it. Along the way, he acted like he was on a sightseeing tour. He climbed up the mountain at the speed of an ordinary person, leisurely and carefree. The Temple of 9 Supremes. Yun Yang suddenly realized that the 9 statues that had been destroyed in the previous battle had been reconstructed, looking just like before. A total of 9 statues stood majestically and solemnly in the Temple of 9 Supremes. It was the image of 9 masked men in black. Jilingxi lifted her head and focused her gaze on the last 2 statues. Behind each of the 2 masked statues was a cloud that seemed to be flying rapidly. It was the image of wind and cloud. Their masters were naturally supreme wind and cloud. In the main hall, a tea table had already been set up. There was only a man in cyan sitting peacefully in the seat with his head lowered, concentrating on brewing tea. The fragrance of tea wafted into the air, and the way this man brewed tea was as smooth as flowing water. The whole process was extremely natural, making the spectators feel extremely comfortable. It was as if just watching him brew tea was already a great visual pleasure. Yin Yang smiled and said, "This Mr. Nien can't be a fake anymore, can he? His true body has descended." The man in green lifted his head and said with a smile, "Lord Supreme Cloud has met me personally. Why should this reputed one conceal myself and make a fool out of myself?" This person's appearance was thin, his hair was slightly gray, and there seemed to be countless clouds flashing through his eyes. He looked like he was floating in the air, and his temperament was extraordinary. Looking at him, one could not help but have a good impression of him. He was indeed a good face. This face was very familiar. Yin Yang nodded and said, "As I expected, Feng Xianga." Mr. Nien smiled. "Lord Supreme Cloud's foresight is miraculous. You've never let down the title of Supreme Wit. Naturally, you won't be wrong. That's right, the god of wine, Feng Xianga, is the identity I used most often when I roamed the martial world in the past." He smiled amiably. "I wonder if Lord Supreme Cloud is satisfied with the fine wine that I've kept in my collection?" Yin Yang laughed and said, "The taste is not bad indeed. It truly lives up to the title of being unparalleled. It's a pity that there's too little of it. It's not a great deed." Mr. Nien guffawed. "I've given you all of my life's treasures. I didn't even keep a pot for myself. Yet you're complaining that it's too little. How good should a great deed be? It's beyond my reach, and I'm powerless." Yin Yang sat down slowly and gestured for Jilingxi to take a seat with him. Then he looked at Mr. Nien with interest and said, "The god of wine's brewing is indeed unparalleled. But how about this tea? If Heaven's Inquisition were here, he would know best," Mr. Nien said. Yin Yang smiled faintly. "There's no need for us to beat around the bush anymore. Heaven's Inquisition has already gone to the bound of universe. He's no longer in Tianxian." Mr. Nien sighed. "We've been friends for a lifetime, yet we've unintentionally parted ways. I wonder if I'll have the chance to meet him again when I've gone to the bound of universe." He picked up the teapot and poured tea for Yin Yang and Jilingxi. He smiled and said, "In this world before you, there was only one person who could make me brew tea with my own hands, Gu Chaoyang. Now there's you. Oh, there's this young lady as well. Of course, it's my honor to be able to serve tea to Lord Supreme Cloud, whom the world worships as a god." Yin Yang picked up the teacup and took a sip. His eyes brightened as he exclaimed, "Great tea." Mr. Nien laughed. "Of course it's great tea. This tea was made when I went to the 9 mountains, crossed the 9 levels, crossed the 9 heavenly rivers, and collected snow lotuses of 9 different colors from the 9 snowy peaks. Before the snow lotuses bloomed, I took only the closed petal of each lotus and soaked it in the water of the 9 underworlds for 9 days and nights. Then 9 virgins in their prime stirred the clouds of the 9 heavens and dried them within 9 breaths with the mystical chi of pure yin." He chuckled softly. "I dare say that I'm the only one in this world who has this tea, and it only costs 9 taels and 9 copper coins." Yin Yang asked cautiously, "May I know the name of this tea?" Mr. Nien smiled and said, "This tea is called Tea of 9 Supremes." Yin Yang clapped his hands and laughed. "Good name. The tea is good, but the name is even better." Mr. Nien squinted his eyes and said, "Indeed, the name is better. Every time I drink this tea, I treasure it very much, not daring to miss a single drop. When I taste the tea, it's like I'm savoring the process of mixing the 9 Supremes into this cup of tea and drinking it. I like this feeling from the bottom of my heart." Yin Yang smiled and said, "Is that so? It's a pity that I have a completely different understanding." Mr. Nien said, "Oh, please enlighten me, Lord Supreme Cloud." Yin Yang said, "My understanding is very simple. The so-called 4 Seasons Tower, the so-called Mr. Nien, have put in so much effort to create this exquisite tea, yet they insist on calling it 9 Supremes. This makes me feel that Mr. Nien seems to be the tea farmer of the 9 Supremes. To please the master, you're willing to go to any lengths. You live up to your name." Mr. Nien stared at Yin Yang. After a long while, he smiled faintly and said, "Every time I drink this tea, I'm very careful with the amount of tea I drink, because I'm afraid that I'll never be able to taste it again if I finish it. Since a year ago, I've stopped drinking this tea, This is because there's only one steeping left. I want to keep this steeping and drink it with the 9 supremes. Only then will I not let this tea down. Chapter 827. It's already too many for the 9 supremes to drink the 9 supremes tea once, so there's really no need for the tea farmer to exist anymore. Since the tea farmer is destined to cease to exist, no one can make the 9 supremes tea anymore. Is this what you mean, sir? He sighed with melancholy. Speaking of which, this tea farmer has really put in a lot of effort. Years of hard work has been consumed in a single gulp, and it's no longer of use. It's really hopeless. I can't help but think of the servants of a wealthy family. They've spent so much effort to flatter their master, but they're not pleased. It's a tragedy to live to this point. Mr. Nian shook his head with a smile. I've tested you. I can't anger you. Likewise. I'm sincerely impressed by your strong composure, Mr. Nian, said Yunyang. If so, let's get straight to the point. I've been beating around the bush too much in this life. I prefer to be straightforward instead. I've never liked to beat around the bush, said Yunyang. Ji Lingxi was dumbfounded as she listened. Both of you have been beating around the bush, scolding each other until your mouths are dry, and I'm confused. But now you're saying in unison that you don't like to beat around the bush. I'm impressed by the thickness of your skin. If you're so thick-skinned, you might as well go straight to heaven. The aroma of tea wafted in the air. Both of them sat facing each other from afar, a faint smile on their faces, their demeanor relaxed and dignified. If Ji Lingxi did not know that there was an unresolvable blood feud between them, she would have thought that they were actually a pair of best friends, who were leisurely chatting over tea. The Four Seasons Tower is detached from worldly affairs. For thousands of years, it's been known as the top in the world, peerless. Yunyang said. In fact, before the last time at Tianxian Cliff, us 9 Supremes brothers had heard of the Four Seasons Tower. We even respected and admired it. At least, compared to the so-called School of Kismet State, it was a far cry. To us at that time, the Four Seasons Tower's renowned and domineering Tianxuan's martial power was our dream. Yunyang sighed softly. But we never expected it. It was actually the Four Seasons Tower who had set up a death trap for us. Even until now, when I've dug out almost everyone in the Four Seasons Tower, I still don't know what the reason is that has caused our stance to be so firm and resolute. He raised his head to look at Mr. Nian and asked with a smile. I wonder if Mr. Nian can clear up my doubts. Mr. Nian's expression did not change. He gently blew at the foam on his tea and said, Do you have any other questions, Lord Supreme Cloud? Why don't you ask them all at once? I will do my best to answer them. Of course there are. When I escaped death that day, I started to take revenge. Ever since I took my revenge, I felt that I had to be careful with every step I took. Every time I thought about it, I was careful and meticulous. When I finally found the Four Seasons Tower's men from the Sea of People, I was also worried that the Four Seasons Tower's retaliation would come at any time, while I was happy and proud. However, I have yet to see the Four Seasons Tower's Supreme Lord Spring Frost taking his revenge in the truest sense. Although the Four Seasons Tower has sent out a lot of men from the lowest to the highest ranks in the process of my targeting of the Four Seasons Tower's forces, the Four Seasons Tower has sent out a lot of manpower. When it comes to being a threat to me, it's completely out of the question. It's also because of this that the doubts in my heart grew. Yunyang said. Later on, I had a feeling that other than those people who were captured by me in the beginning, those who came to the 5 venerable lords were actually released by the Four Seasons Tower's higher-ups for me to kill. This feeling was even more obvious when it came to the civil and martial ministers. As for Xia, Qiu and Dong, it could be said that they had given me the name list directly. Although it was faked by Wu Ying, it was still illogical. The Four Seasons Tower has been renowned in Tianxian for countless years. How could they have overlooked this? May I ask why? Yunyang asked faintly. Mr. Nian smiled faintly as he poured tea, not saying a word. First, you sowed an eternal grudge with us, the 9 Supremes, and then you sent the Four Seasons Tower's men, from the lowest to the highest, to my blade so that I could eliminate them one by one. Such self-destruction is baffling. Yunyang said. I believe that you're not out of your mind. You must have some other important purpose. However, what I'm most helpless about now is that even though I know that you have an important purpose, I still can't let go of the people you've sent to me. I can only kill them one by one. However, with each person I kill, I feel that I'm one step closer to your ultimate goal. Your method of killing with a borrowed knife is truly impressive, but it's also infuriating at the same time. Today we've agreed to a final battle. Since the final battle is imminent, it's time for these mysteries to be uncovered. Yin Yang said, I'm ashamed. I've always prided myself on my unparalleled wisdom and foresight, but I still haven't figured out the crux of the matter. Please enlighten me. Mr. Nian exhaled softly and said with a smile, not bad at all. There's indeed another reason for these things. Supreme Cloud's judgment of this tower's capability, purpose, and even self-awareness are extremely accurate. Supreme Cloud's reputation is well-deserved. The fundamental reason is beyond the realm of common sense. It's reasonable that Lord Supreme Cloud can't think of it, and can't figure it out. It's expected. He looked at Yin Yang with a smile. Other than that, is there anything else you'd like to ask? Yin Yang smiled. These 2 questions are enough. Next, it's time for you to ask. Mr. Nian said, that's right. I have a few questions to ask Supreme Cloud as well. What I'm most curious about is the residence of 9 Supreme's secret, and how you managed to keep your identity a secret. If it weren't for the School of Kismet State's unexpected intervention, I'm afraid I'd still be in the dark. I wouldn't have known that Lord Supreme Cloud's true self has long been exposed to the world, and that you've had many dealings with my tower's people. He chuckled and said, just like what Lord Supreme Cloud has said, after today's battle, either the 4 Seasons Tower will vanish from the martial world forever, or Lord Supreme Cloud will rest eternally in the ground. At this point, there's really no secret that can't be shared. Yin Yang said, I'd like to hear the details. Mr. Nian smiled. It looks like Lord Supreme Cloud wants me to speak first. Yin Yang replied faintly, because I'm the one who asked first. It's only right that I get the answer first. Mr. Nian guffawed, not at all offended by Yin Yang's words. He was silent for a moment, as if he was arranging his thoughts. After a long while, he looked at the lingering aroma of tea and spoke slowly. The 4 Seasons Tower has been passed down for so many years, but this is the first time it's been forced into such a perilous situation. Although I've done all of this on purpose, it can also be considered as heaven's will. Or perhaps, heaven's will and man's cooperation. The root of the matter will probably start from when I obtained the 4 Seasons Tower's legacy. There's yin and yang in the sky, and the 4 seasons in a year. Mr. Nian said, I was 18 years old that year. I was one of the 5 supreme disciples of the 4 Seasons Tower. Yin Yang thought to himself, the 4 Seasons Tower is truly an oddity. They actually have as many as 5 supreme disciples. Chapter 828. Mr. Nian's expression was tinged with nostalgia. There's no need to think too much about it. One of the 5 leading disciples would definitely inherit Mr. Nian's position, but the other 4 would also enjoy glory and power. There wouldn't be too many grudges. This is the 4 Seasons Tower's tradition. Back then, my master was already close to 3,000 years old. He was already at the end of his rope, and could pass away at any time. He gave us a task and asked us to do it. Those who could do it would be the next leader of the 4 Seasons Tower, while the 4 who couldn't were spring, summer, autumn, and winter. This was the structure of the 4 Seasons Tower's highest level. You should be able to relate it now. In fact, all the leaders of the 4 Seasons Tower have the surname Nian, or should I say Mr. Nian. Mr. Nian said faintly, as for my real name, it's Feng Xianga. This is my real name. The task that my master entrusted to me isn't new. It's the unchanging, ultimate goal that the 4 Seasons Tower has been searching for. The location of God's Gate. Mr. Nian chuckled bitterly. I believe that Lord Supreme Cloud has learned about God's bone from the 3 venerable ones. However, there's still a great secret about God's grave. Every 365 years, the grave of God will change its location. In other words, we'll need to locate it again, and confirm its location. This is where the mission lies. In that mission, I was the first to find the grave, and became the Four Seasons Tower's new Mr. Nyen. What's more, when I was searching for the God's Gate, I coincidentally encountered the shift of the stars. I stuck a divine weapon at the Stargate, but it accidentally caused the God's Grave's location to be permanently fixed. It would never move again. Since then, I've contributed greatly to the Four Seasons Tower, and the position of the sect leader was no longer in doubt. However, it was then that I truly understood the Four Seasons Tower's true mission, or rather, where the Four Seasons Tower's survival was at stake. God's bone has mystical effects and immense power, but once it's obtained, it can't be stopped. Once it's stopped, one will suffer the backlash of the God's bone's spiritual power. Unfortunately, there's a limit to how much God's bone can be obtained. Countless seniors of the Four Seasons Tower have perished at this point. After the God's bone was fixed, I asked for the Patriarch's will and studied it over and over again. However, I focused my attention on one sentence. When the 9 stars shine on the sun, I will either soar to the 9 heavens or sink into oblivion for all eternity. Mr. Nyen looked at Yin Yang with a rather complicated gaze. When the 9 stars shone, the residents of 9 Supremes appeared in the Tianxian continent. From that moment onwards, the Four Seasons Tower's opposition to all of you has become a foregone conclusion. If the Four Seasons Tower doesn't want to sink into oblivion forever, it has to stop the 9 Supremes soaring into the 9 heavens. Yin Yang could not help sighing. This was truly an undeserved calamity. However, the first master of the Four Seasons Tower was truly remarkable. He had actually left such a message a few thousand years ago. If there's a choice, who wouldn't want to live a carefree life and embark on the path of cultivation and peace? However, when the 9 stars shine, the residence of 9 Supremes really emerges. Is everything fated, or is this how it should be? Mr. Nyen's voice was filled with a sigh. Since the prophecy of the 9 stars has come true, then the two outcomes of soaring into the 9 heavens, or sinking into oblivion for eternity, are inevitable. Mr. Nyen said faintly. However, since such a prophecy exists, there must be a reason behind it. Everything in this world has a cause and effect and vice versa. Therefore, I've tried to find the reason. If I can find the reason, or perhaps I've found a variable that can affect or interfere with this destined outcome, allowing it to be beneficial to us as much as possible. With this as the starting point, I've deduced the subsequent events. The first thing I've foreseen is undoubtedly the appearance of the 9 stars. The impact is immense. It could be a crisis for the Four Seasons Tower, but it could also be an opportunity. As long as I can seize this opportunity, I can naturally avoid sinking into oblivion for eternity. Lord Supreme Cloud, from what you see, does my understanding make sense? Mr. Nyen asked. Yin Yang sighed and said, You're right. If it were me, I'd definitely understand it the same way. Perhaps everyone understood the saying that danger was accompanied by opportunity. In spite of this, there were very few people who truly understood what to do and how to deal with the crisis when it came. However, it was obvious that the Four Seasons Tower and Mr. Nyen had chosen the most correct and proactive approach. Hence, there was the Battle of Mount Tianxian and the 9 Supremes elegy. Based on this starting point, the residents of 9 Supremes appeared after the 9 stars. I didn't make a move because I wasn't clear about the latter half of the prophecy then. Acting blindly would only be futile. However, when the 9 Supremes appeared one after another, it showed who the 9 dragons belonged to. As the 9 Supremes developed step by step, the providence that the Four Seasons Tower had accumulated over the years showed signs of gradually disintegrating and disappearing. With such proof, there was no longer any doubt. Even then, I still didn't have the thought of destroying the 9 Supremes because I hadn't found the root of the problem. I wasn't clear about the root of this prophecy, so I forced myself to act. Even if I destroyed the 9 Supremes, I was still a puppet in the prophecy, acting according to the prophecy's trajectory. As I continued to analyze and research in detail, I finally confirmed that the Four Seasons Tower's providence was actually linked to God's grave. Yet, the providence of God's grave and the residence of 9 Supremes were mutually reinforcing and counteracting each other. In other words, the stronger the residence of 9 Supremes was, the weaker the god's grave would be, and vice versa. After confirming this, we made many attempts in secret, such as using various techniques to guide and release the providence of the 9 Supremes, or even forcefully plundering it. However, what made us feel helpless and powerless was that the providence of the residence of 9 Supremes could not be absorbed at all. Both sides would only grow stronger, while the other would gradually weaken. It was difficult for external forces to interfere. Left with no other choice, we could only use the most ruthless method to annihilate the residence of 9 Supremes. So from then on, I sent people one after another to attack the residence of 9 Supremes in the most direct way. Yin Yang heaved a long sigh. I see. This is the truth. Back when the residence of 9 Supremes was founded and the 9 Supremes had just been formed, the residence of 9 Supremes had suffered wave after wave of attacks, wanting to wipe the residence of 9 Supremes off the face of this world. The strength of the incoming attacks was extremely high. However, without exception, they were all devoured by the energy of the residence of 9 Supremes. Those who came to attack the residence of 9 Supremes died from the backlash. It was the same, regardless of the level. Therefore, Yin Yang and the others had no idea what level these invading enemies were. Since they were all dead, there was no point in dwelling on it. Moreover, there was no room for them to dwell on it even if they wanted to, because those who had been devoured had all died a horrible death. They could not even be recognized. It turned out that those people were from the Four Seasons Tower. The battle between the 9 Supremes and the Four Seasons Tower had actually begun a long time ago. It was just that one side had been unaware of it all along. After 3 consecutive waves of probing, all those who attacked died from the backlash. These 3 waves of people were handpicked by me. The first wave was at the level of Grandmaster. The second wave was at the level of the 5 Venerable Lords. The third wave was only 2 people, but they were already at the pinnacle of this world, just slightly weaker than me. Not only did these 3 waves of combat power fail to destroy the residence of 9 Supremes, they died from the backlash. This further proved that the residence of 9 Supremes is indestructible. Mr. Nyen said, since the residence of 9 Supremes can't be destroyed, the only way to achieve an outcome beneficial to the Four Seasons Tower is to destroy the 9 Supremes. However, I have to say that the secrecy of the 9 Supremes members is indeed impressive. There's no oversight at all. Mr. Nyen sighed. Even I couldn't find out the identity of the 9 Supremes, even after exhausting all my means. I couldn't even get a hold of the 9 Supremes' basic movements. The 9 Supremes have contributed greatly to Yutong. The 9 Supremes who have appeared on Yutong's battlefield many times are not controlled by imperial authority, nor are they monitored by the Board of War, the Board of Appointments, or any other Yutong department. I can't believe such a strange thing would actually happen. Left with no other choice, I began to plan for the Four Seasons Tower's manpower to infiltrate Yutong. It was a more comprehensive and indiscriminate infiltration than before. However, during this process, there was a new change in providence, an extremely bizarre change. Such a change has never happened in the Four Seasons Tower's 10,000 years of existence. Today's episode is even better. I've reached the crucial plot. Chapter 829. At this point, Mr. Nyen could not help but sigh. Initially, according to my estimation, as the Four Seasons Tower's men infiltrate deeper into Yutong, it would definitely affect the 9 Supremes even more. However, the reality is that as the Four Seasons Tower's men infiltrate Yutong, the 9 Supremes' providence grows stronger. Such a strange thing makes me feel even more helpless. This situation proves that no matter who I send over, it's Yutong's national power that will ultimately increase the 9 Supremes' providence. Even if that person is a spy, and his original intention is to harm Yutong, the result is the complete opposite. Mr. Nyen said, the Four Seasons Tower's providence is inevitably weakening bit by bit. However, God's grave is getting easier to enter following my setup. Conversely, it's getting easier to obtain God's bones. This proves that my setup is effective. Therefore, the crux of the matter has shifted to whether we can eradicate the 9 Supremes and in the possibility of the dragon ascending to the 9 heavens. Mr. Nian said faintly, "Speaking of which, with Lord Supreme Cloud's wisdom, you should already understand the whole story, right?" Yin Yang replied, "Yes, I do understand. I understand everything." Mr. Nian chuckled bitterly. "Unfortunately, things don't end here. At least it's not enough. I've collaborated with Dongxian to plan the battle at Tianxian Cliff. Dongxian sent out its army to oppress the 9 supremes, forcing them to lend a hand. I've mobilized all the informants and received news of the 9 supremes along the way. In the end, your Tianxian Cliff ambushed Dongxian because you fell into our trap. Lord Supreme Cloud is involved in all of this. I won't go into details. It was after that battle that the 8 supremes were annihilated, and only Supreme Cloud was lucky enough to survive. The Four Seasons Tower's providence suddenly underwent a drastic change. It skyrocketed in a straight line. Compared to when it was at its peak in the past, it's several times better." Mr. Nian said faintly. "Since then, the Four Seasons Tower's men's cultivation base and providence have all been growing. Only, the men sent to provoke you won't have the same providence. The only one left, Supreme Cloud, hasn't been found, so we can't do our best." Yin Yang was hit with a sudden realization. "So, the reason why you keep exposing these people is so that I can help you get rid of these people, so that their providence can return to the Four Seasons Tower, and prevent your own providence from leaking away? Of course, that's not all. My bigger plan is to follow the clues and find out who this Supreme Cloud, who has been in hiding for a long time, is, once and for all. It's too bad that Lord Supreme Cloud is too cautious. On the contrary, after these people's karmic luck returns, the others in the tower will benefit even more. It was especially useful for nourishing the godly bones. Through the circulation of the power of providence, the godly bones could fuse with the human body to a greater extent. I've come to a conclusion. As long as there's a sufficient amount of providence, even if it's all 12 gods' bones, they'll all be transferred to the Four Seasons Tower one day." Yin Yang frowned and said, "I don't understand. It's not that I don't understand what you're saying, but it's hard to make sense of it." Mr. Nian chuckled humorlessly. "I don't understand this either. Those who died were the Four Seasons Tower's men. Why is it that after they went to Yutong, even if they were disloyal, even if they were traitors, even if they brought calamity to the nation and the people, would they still be integrated into Yutong's providence? Or is it that after these people were tainted by the providence over there, the providence could still return to the Four Seasons Tower after their deaths, and still have such an effect? This is even more incomprehensible to me," Mr. Nian said in a low voice. "In the end, I attributed it to the residence of 9 Supremes' marvelous mystery. Perhaps this is an opportunity, or an evolution of opportunity." Yin Yang exhaled softly and murmured, "The Four Seasons Tower is against us for this reason. Now, I finally understand everything." Mr. Nian smiled. "You still only understand half of it. As for the other half, if you win today's battle and enter God's grave, you'll naturally know. However, if you lose, there's nothing more to say." Mr. Nian sat up straight and looked at Yin Yang. "Now it's my turn to ask questions." Yin Yang replied faintly, "Please speak. I'll try my best to tell you everything I know. Before the battle of life and death, to have a heart-to-heart talk with my greatest enemy, to you and to me, I have no regrets in life or death." Mr. Nian chuckled. "First of all, how was Supreme Cloud's identity kept a secret? Whether it was before or after the battle at Tianxian Cliff, we've tried our best to investigate the background and identity of the 9 Supremes, but we've never found anything. Especially after that battle, if it weren't for the fact that the 9 Supremes' providence still remained and even grew strong again, I would have misjudged that the 9 Supremes had been completely eradicated. Supreme Cloud Yin Yang can be said to be the person who has dealt with the Four Seasons Tower the most among the people of Yutong. It's truly remarkable that Supreme Cloud could do it without leaving a trace. Secondly, what mysteries and mysteries lie within the residence of 9 Supremes? Or should I say, what are the secrets of the residence of 9 Supremes? To this day, there shouldn't be any more questions about keeping it a secret." Yin Yang replied faintly. "Is that all Mr. Nian's questions?" These two questions are essentially the same. Oh, Mr. Nian asked. Yun Yang continued. Actually, Supreme Cloud has never been invisible to the Four Seasons Tower. He's always been ostentatious. Mr. Nian chuckled humorlessly. It's because of what you've said that we're in such dire straits today. After the battle at Tianxian Cliff, I noticed that the Nine Supremes' providence was weak, but it wasn't extinguished. When I asked Gu Chaoyang, I found out that someone among the Nine Supremes had actually escaped death and survived the ordeal. Following the guidance of the Providence, we've confirmed your location to be in Tiantang City. We've observed almost everyone in Tiantang City, and we've rarely missed anyone, including you. Mr. Nian was obviously baffled by the initial judgment. He paused for a moment before continuing. In fact, you young Master Yun, who has a reputation in Tiantang City, but an extremely shallow cultivation base, were among the first batch to be eliminated. Yun Yang coughed, not knowing whether to laugh or cry at Mr. Nian's words. He had never expected himself to be among the first batch of suspects to be eliminated from the Four Seasons Tower's intelligence system. How did such a divine logic come about? Having a bad reputation and being a popinjay was not the best way to conceal one's identity. This was no longer a mistake of being blind under the lamp. The Four Seasons Tower has indeed made a huge misjudgment in this matter. Mr. Nian sighed. If it wasn't so, you wouldn't have been able to turn things around so easily. Perhaps this whole thing would have ended a long time ago, turning into a completely different situation. During the first wave of investigation, the famous young masters in Tiantang City, the young masters of the spring, summer, autumn and winter families, as well as the head of Yutong's popinjays, good-for-nothing great young Master Yin, were indeed eliminated at the first instance. Back then, Supreme Lord Spring Frost was personally in charge of the investigation, personally coming up with the first elimination list. Sai, you good-for-nothing young Master Yun Yang, were ranked first in this list. In other words, in He Hanqing's eyes back then, you were the most unlikely person to be Supreme Cloud. Looking at it now, such a decision isn't just laughable. It's an insane decision. Recommending a book, The Emperor. Those who are interested go read it. Chapter 830. Even with Mr. Nian's composure, he could not help feeling a pang in his heart when he spoke of this. Back then, He Hanqing thought that the Nine Supremes must be the kind of people who kept a low profile. Since only one of them had returned for revenge, they would naturally be more cautious and would not show themselves easily. Therefore, those who were ostentatious and domineering on the surface should not be part of the investigation, especially great young Master Yin, who had the famous nickname of good-for-nothing. As the saying goes, a person's name is often wrong, but his nickname will never be wrong. Even I, the esteemed one, agree with this saying. This is human nature after all, and it's completely understandable. However, never would I have thought that it was this tiny bit of negligence, this tiny bit of assumption, that caused the Four Seasons Tower to commit the greatest mistake. Mr. Nian shook his head and smiled bitterly. Yin Yang smiled faintly as well. There was an inexplicable coldness in his smile. Thinking back to that time, most of the other Nine Supremes' brothers' identities had indeed been low-key. Only he and Eighth Brother had done the exact opposite, hiding in the imperial court and shielding themselves from the public's eyes and ears. He did not expect that it was this that had saved his life. Good for nothing. It was such a distant nickname. He did not expect that the after-effect of the battle that day would be a protective talisman that he was unaware of. This should be an unfunny joke. However, this joke is unusually fatal. With this mistake as the beginning, the second and third investigations were all done to eliminate you guys first, then work on the others. Yin Yang did not know whether to laugh or cry. Come to think of it, this should be the case. After the first investigation, who would work on those who had been eliminated and confirmed to be not the Nine Supremes? This was something that no one would do, unless they had done it countless times and confirmed that this method could not be found. Only then would they turn around and revise the direction. However, He Hanqing obviously did not wait for this moment. Later on, there were people who suggested a new investigation. When the venerable lords came into contact with you, they could clearly feel that you were different from the others. You were unusually active, and your ability grew at an alarming rate. However, your relationship with Ling Xiaozui was revealed. Yin Yang sighed. There was a bitter smile on Mr. Nian's face. The appearance of Ling Xiaozui, the ultimate weapon, is the best chance to pull you, Supreme Cloud, out of the picture. It's just one of the reasons why I'm hesitant to provoke Ling Xiaozui, the unrivaled expert. After all, when the Four Seasons Tower's survival is at stake, a strong enemy like Ling Xiaozui would naturally be unwilling to provoke him. On the other hand, you credited Ling Xiaozui for the huge improvement in your cultivation base. After all, with Ling Xiaozui's ability, it wouldn't be strange for your ability to improve tremendously in a short amount of time, if he were to be close to you. On the contrary, it's only natural. Now that I think about it, Ling Xiaozui's ability is unfathomable, but his wealth is very limited. It's not easy to groom a young expert in such a short amount of time. It's a shame that the Four Seasons Tower was blind, completely ignoring such a huge flaw. Instead, they found excuses for all of you, and let it go, coming to such a logical conclusion. It really makes me feel helpless. After that, your name appeared several times in my line of sight, like the battle between the four venerable ones, and the battle between you and the boy from the other world. Like how you rushed to the Fortress of Resilience alone to provide aid. Everything is still vivid in my mind, but I always missed it because of such a reason. If time could be reversed, I would kill Supreme Lord Spring Frost He Hanqing 100 times over with my own hands. Mr. Nian smiled faintly, but the menacing meaning in his words was clear. He lifted his head to look at He Hanqing. An investigation like this is equivalent to He Hanqing sending the entire Four Seasons Tower's power to your butcher's knife. Otherwise, everything would have ended a long time ago. Yin Yang said leisurely. If time could be reversed, I would definitely have a drink with old Master Wenzong. He has protected Yutong his entire life, sparing no effort in doing so. Mr. Nian chuckled coldly. He was so choked by the words that he almost did not want to continue. Of course, there's another point that leaves no room for doubt on your side. You've never shown any signs of anyone obeying your orders. As everyone knows, the 9 Supremes have to mobilize the 9 Heavens Dictum's power, but that mysterious force has obviously made a move. This proves that Supreme Cloud has been manipulating its movements all along, proving your innocence. However, every time it makes a move, you, Yin Yang, have done nothing at all. You haven't even seen a stranger. Come to think of it, this must be another layer of concealment that you've prepared. Regarding this, Mr. Nian has overestimated me. It's a pity that Mr. Nian has never entered the residence of 9 Supremes. Yin Yang said faintly. There's a strange existence called the 9 Heavens Dictum in the residence of 9 Supremes. This is the key that allows me to control the force that the 9 Heavens Dictum belongs to. Mr. Nian's expression turned serious. Oh, the 9 Heavens Dictum is the name of the organization under the 9 Supremes that everyone knows. However, to me it's a token. Through this token, I can command the 9 Heavens Dictum to do anything, even from thousands of miles away. Yin Yang said slowly. Therefore, judging whether I'm Supreme Cloud or not based on my connection with the 9 Heavens Dictum, the answer is destined to be wrong. This has been a false proposition from the very beginning. It's a pity that it's not a crime of war. Mr. Nian's expression, which had been calm since the beginning of the conversation, finally changed. There's actually such a thing? There's actually such a magical thing in this world. Yin Yang smiled. Perhaps Mr. Nian doesn't believe it, but the truth is, even the people under the 9 Heavens Dictum don't know who Supreme Cloud is, or who Supreme Cloud's true identity is. From the beginning to the end, there's only one thing that can be confirmed. Other than the 9 Supremes' unique cultivation method, no one else can use the 9 Heavens Dictum to send messages. Therefore, the one who sent the message must be one of the 9 Supremes. Mr. Nian was stunned for a long time before he finally chuckled bitterly. I see. It's not too unjust for the Four Seasons Tower to lose the intelligence war. It's indeed a crime of war. Yin Yang smiled faintly and did not comment further. Mr. Nian's meaning was clear. In this era where fast horses and flying birds were still required to send messages, something that defied common sense and could be transmitted thousands of miles away had actually appeared. While everyone was staring at the communication channel, someone else had completed his task from tens of thousands of miles away. It would be strange if he did not lose under such circumstances. This is one of the core secrets of the residence of Nine Supremes, Yin Yang said. Does Mr. Nian want to know any other secrets of the residence of Nine Supremes? Mr. Nian sighed softly. If Lord Supreme Cloud is willing to tell me, of course. I'm more than willing to listen and broaden my horizons. Looking at the graceful Mr. Nian, Yin Yang sighed softly and said, Sir, your demeanor and bearing are indeed extraordinary. It reminds me of a saying. Mr. Nian smiled faintly. You are a beauty, but why have you become a thief? That's right, that's right. Sir, you know me well. Mr. Nian smiled and said, What is an official? What is a thief? Yin Yang was silent. Finally he smiled. Yes, we are friends of life and death, because our standpoints are different. That's right. We are friends of life and death because our standpoints are different. Mr. Nian sighed softly. Chapter 831. Lord Supreme Cloud's explanation has enlightened me. But it's this friendship of life and death that has won me over. Mr. Nian smiled. Since we're friends of life and death, we should fight to the death today to end this battle of destiny. If so, why don't you tell me more about the residence of Nine Supreme secrets? Lord Supreme Cloud. I've lived my entire life and I've seen many things, but this is the first time I've encountered something so strange. Yin Yang flashed a mocking smile and said, The secret of the residence of Nine Supremes belongs only to the Nine Supremes. To put it more bluntly, I've mentioned the truth just now. Only the unique cultivation method of the Nine Supremes can activate the secret hidden in the residence of Nine Supremes. Other than the 9 of us, no one else possesses the cultivation method of the Nine Supremes. Therefore, it's useless for Mr. Nian to know about the residence of Nine Supreme secrets. It'll only add to your troubles. There are too many mysteries in this world that are beyond everyone's knowledge. What's the point of forcing it, especially now that the residence of Nine Supremes has disappeared? Mr. Nian's expression changed for the first time. Disappeared? Wasn't it concealed by Lord Supreme Cloud using a secret art, and not revealed to anyone? Yin Yang smiled and said, I know that Mr. Nian has always coveted the residence of Nine Supremes. But now, it's already too late. Too late? Mr. Nian asked in a daze. Yin Yang answered with certainty. It is indeed too late. The residence of Nine Supremes' destiny has come to an end. Such a divine artifact shouldn't stay in the secular world, should it? Besides, our paths are different. Mr. Nian smiled and murmured, Different paths, we can't work together. Yin Yang said, That's about the residence of Nine Supreme secrets. There's no use in knowing more. It'll only disturb you. Mr. Nian's gaze was cold as he said faintly, No matter what, I've finally solved the greatest mystery that's been in my heart for a long time. I have to thank Lord Supreme Cloud. The Nine Supremes dictum. What a dictum of Nine Supremes. Yin Yang picked up the teacup and took a sip. The tea is not bad, he said faintly. Mr. Nian was silent for a moment before he said, It's a pity that the tea is already cold. Yin Yang smirked coldly and said, The words have been spoken, and the tea has turned cold. Man proposes but God disposes. God's will is always toying with us. Mr. Nian smiled. Lord Supreme Cloud, I thought you should be brimming with confidence when you took the initiative to propose this challenge. Why are you talking about fate here? With the current situation, it's almost certain that Lord Supreme Cloud has come to this duel of life and death with only 2 people. I don't know if he's blindly believing in heaven's will, or if he's underestimating the Four Seasons Tower. Yin Yang's eyes were half-lidded as he said, If Mr. Nian didn't believe in heaven's will, why did he imprison Gu Chaoyang for so many years? During the battle at Tianxian Cliff that day, the 9 Supremes weren't annihilated. Heaven's will has long been clear. This worldly matter, right and wrong, gratitude and resentment will be dealt with from the beginning. It's only right and proper. Mr. Nian replied indifferently. I've understood Lord Supreme White Cloud's intentions since we first met. And it's even more so now. Lord Supreme Cloud is indeed loyal to the country and the people. He is the #1 hero in the world. The so-called heroes are nothing more than this. It's a pity that the 9 Supreme Tea is gone from this world. Mr. Nian sighed with melancholy. The 9 Supremes will cease to exist in this world as well. What a pity. With his arms behind his back, he walked out slowly and said leisurely, Supreme Cloud, there are all the Four Seasons Tower's top-notch elites on this cliff now. A total of 12 inheritors of God's bone. The Four Seasons Tower's brothers for the 12th month. Other than that, there are also the Four Seasons messengers of spring, summer, autumn, and winter. And me, the leader of the Four Seasons, Nian. The 29 people here are the Four Seasons Tower's pinnacle combat power, their ultimate force. In other words, if you have the ability to kill all 29 of us here, then there will be no Four Seasons Tower in the Tianxian continent from now on. Mr. Nian was already at the door. Yin Yang asked quietly, there won't be a Four Seasons Tower in the Tianxian continent? Do you mean that there are other Four Seasons Towers in other places? Mr. Nian chuckled softly. Perhaps there really isn't. The bound of universe is a place that I've never set foot in. Yin Yang did not speak. Mr. Nian's form vanished like a drifting cloud at the door. Since the beginning of time, the 4 seasons of a year have existed forever. How can the 9 Supremes, who appeared by chance, compare to them? Supreme Cloud, focus on preparing for the battle. An hour later, we shall fight to the death and end our grudges. I have no confidence in this battle, but I believe that you, Lord Supreme Cloud, don't have absolute confidence either. However, when it comes to the final resolution, whether it's your soul that wanders into the abyss or my death, neither of us will have any regrets. If you behead me, I hope that you'll toast me and tell me your unspoken secret. If I behead you, I'll toast you as well. His voice faded away. The tea table, teapot, and teacups that were made of flawless jade in the room were abandoned by Mr. Nian just like that, as if they were worthless. Jilingxi had not uttered a single word throughout their conversation. It was only now, when she saw Mr. Nian leave and Yin Yang sit there in silence, that she could not help saying, this Mr. Nian, if that's the case, he's worthy of being a dominating figure in the martial arts world. Whether he's good or bad in his actions aside, his demeanor and grace alone are already worthy of being called the pinnacle of this world. Yin Yang said in a low voice, which one of those who can stir up trouble in the martial world isn't a peerless talent? The Four Seasons Tower has dominated Tianxuan's martial world for tens of thousands of years. Naturally, they've produced more talents. If Mr. Nian isn't exceptionally talented, how can he be qualified to lead the Four Seasons Tower? At the end of the day, it's just a grudge caused by different standpoints. However, fate dictates that it's still an unsolvable topic. It's obvious that Mr. Nian and the Four Seasons Tower must kill me in order to occupy God's grave completely and ascend to the position of God, an unparalleled achievement. I, on the other hand, must uproot the Four Seasons Tower to avenge my 8 brothers. None of what Mr. Nian said today was a lie. Jilingxi said, I've been monitoring this with the art of frozen heart and telepathy. There's no doubt about it. Yin Yang said quietly, it's expected. Today's battle is a battle of life and death. So-called lies are completely useless at a time like this. Instead of forcefully contending with words, it's better to be sincere and respect this opponent of yours. Respect his own life and death as well. At this moment he won't lie. Do you have a plan for how to fight after an hour? They have the advantage in numbers. It's not a lie. Jilingxi asked worriedly. Yin Yang chuckled. What's the use of more people, let alone 29? Fighting until the last person fell was good enough. The reason why I suggested it, and Mr. Nian agreed to it, is to settle our grudges in the purest manner of the martial world. The final battle this time has to be settled in the martial world's way. The purest manner of the martial world is nothing more than battle and life and death. Chapter 832. An hour was neither short nor long. However, to Fu Baogua and the others who had been waiting below, This period of time felt like a year. An instant felt like a year. Every time the time it took to drink a cup of tea, an incense stick of time, or an instant passed, everyone's hearts were burning with anxiety. Lord Supreme Cloud had been up the mountain for a long time. It had been a long time. But why was there still no movement? What was the situation up there? No matter how confident they were in Lord Supreme Cloud, everyone was still extremely anxious. No one was an exception. Fu Baogua stood there, his anxiety evident. His usual composure and the demeanor of a great general were nowhere to be seen. His demeanor was like that of an ant on a hot pan. He paced back and forth, occasionally raising his head to look up at the mountain, sighing one after another. How is it? Why is there no movement at all? Since it's a battle between the world's top cultivators, how can it be so silent? Has the battle not started, or is it already over? I heard that a battle between experts happens in the blink of an eye. Could it be? The generals at the side were also scratching their ears and cheeks. They were so anxious that they wanted to rush up the mountain, right now, to see what was going on. After a long, long time. Marshal, why don't I go up the mountain to see what's going on? A general said anxiously. I really can't wait any longer. All right. Just as Fu Baogua spoke, before his voice trailed off, all of a sudden, a long howl that shook the sky and shattered the void came from the top of the mountain, carrying with it an unparalleled murderous intent. Mr. Nian, come and fight. It's Lord Supreme Cloud's voice. Fu Baogua stood up excitedly when he heard the voice. The rest of the people's eyes shone as well. They had only heard the voice, but they were already trembling uncontrollably with excitement. Then an equally violent sound rang out. It was as if a bolt of lightning had ignited a fire in the earth. In an instant the earth shook and the mountains shook. Everyone was more than 30 miles away, but they could still clearly feel the violent tremors under their feet. Some of the soldiers were even shaken off the ground and fell to the ground again. At the same time, Yun Yang's voice rang out again. Fu Baogua, pull your men back another 30 miles. Yutong's iron-blooded soldiers can't be lost here for nothing. Orders must be obeyed. Fu Baogua's expression was unprecedentedly solemn. He stood up straight and said in a low voice, Yes, sir. Although he was far away and could not see the other party's image, Fu Baogua's actions made it seem like Supreme Cloud was right in front of him. He was as solemn as if he had just received an order. Retreat. Everyone move. Quick. At that moment, the rumbling sounds from the top of the mountain finally started to ring out. The decisive battle had finally begun. When Yun Yang and Ji Lingxi stepped out of the Temple of Nine Supremes, there were 7 people standing in front of them. All 7 of them were wreathed in murderous intent. The person in the middle was dressed in an elegant green robe, like a bamboo in spring. He was tall and had a thin face, and he held a verdant flute in his hand. There were 6 people beside him. 3 of them were dressed in green, and the other 3 were dressed in yellow. Unlike the leader whose murderous intent was barely visible, these 6 people all wore cold expressions. Their hostility was evident as they pointed at Yun Yang. Lord Supreme Cloud, Spring of the Four Seasons Tower is here to learn from you. The leader in green spoke with a faint smile. His expression was relaxed, as if he had brought a group of good friends for a stroll in spring. How should I address you? Yin Yang asked. Lord Supreme Cloud, you can call me Spring. Spring smiled elegantly. As for the ones beside me, 3 of them are January, February, and March respectively. The other 3 are the Four Seasons Tower's 3 gods' envoys. Lord Supreme Cloud has conversed with our leader for a long time, so you should know who we are. Spring. 3 gods' envoys in one spring 3 months. Is this the Four Seasons Tower's standard lineup for entertaining guests? Yin Yang smiled faintly and said, Let me learn from all of you. I want to see if the Four Seasons Tower's everlasting reputation is worthy of its name. Spring replied, I just want to learn from the renowned Lord Supreme Cloud's skills before the chief does. He smiled casually. I've fought with Lord Supreme Cloud in the dark for so long, but I've never had the chance to learn from you personally. If I were to attack you with all of my men, it would be too much of a disrespect to Lord Supreme Cloud. Yin Yang smiled. I understand. It was indeed understandable. Which one of these people was not a top-notch expert? Which one of these top-notch experts was not a proud and arrogant person? How could they be willing to abandon their identities and gang up on each other when they did not understand the other party's strength? Especially when the other party was just a small fry not long ago. All the more reason not to make a fuss about it. Lord Supreme Cloud, please. Spring smiled faintly, his demeanor dignified. Yin Yang smiled back. Please. At this moment, the purple chi in Yin Yang's deific consciousness space surged and billowed. Emmy's rare liveliness was nowhere to be seen. It stood quietly and solemnly, fully focused on helping Yin Yang, not daring to slack off. After all, this moment was the most direct reflection of life and death for Emmy. In his dantian, mystical chi was circulating at a high speed. Yin Yang's face was faintly suffused with purple chi. His right hand stretched out slowly, his fair and slender fingers stretched out in front of him. He smiled faintly and said, "The final battle is about to begin. Let me start annihilating spring first. After today's battle, the 4 seasons shall cease to exist, and the end of the year shall cease to be a year." Clang! A loud and clear clang of a saber rang out, shaking everyone's heart. It was a heart-stirring sound. A long, elegant saber with a smooth, elegant design appeared in Yin Yang's palm out of thin air. Under the illumination of the sun, the saber's blade actually glowed in 7 colors, making it look even more dazzling. The long saber hummed automatically in Yin Yang's hand, like a warrior who had been looking forward to a battle for a long time finally appearing in front of the battlefield. It was an indescribable thrill, filled with a thirst for blood. Good saber. Spring's eyes glowed. Yin Yang let out a long howl. There are clouds in the sky, and there is a saber above the clouds. The human heart is like the clouds, and heaven's will is like the saber. With the hands of the clouds, holding the saber of heaven's will, I shall send you on your way. He then raised the long saber above his head and hollered, "Come on, let's fight." Before his words echoed in the air, the saber had already slashed down, its power unstoppable and unstoppable. The saber's power was impressive, but in the eyes of the opponents, they were too far apart. There was a space of 50 to 60 feet. How could they defeat the enemy if they only attacked from where they stood? Therefore, the 7 opponents sneered at the same time. What was the point of attacking from such a distance in a battle of this level? Was he trying to establish his dominance, or was he trying to be funny? There was no need to pay attention to such an attack. Could it be that Supreme Cloud was relying on his demeanor and had purposely made a feint? However, the next moment, the 7 of them were shocked. Chapter 833. This was because the moment Yin Yang's saber was swung out, it underwent a transformation that was beyond everyone's understanding under the watchful eyes of the crowd. The gleaming saber that was initially only 3 feet long suddenly underwent a transformation the moment it was about to slash downwards. It was a massive and shocking transformation. The moment the saber fell, it expanded into a giant saber that was 70 feet long. The slanted slash in the air suddenly transformed into a sweeping attack that enveloped all 7 men at the same time. Furthermore, the saber's edge that seemed to be deliberately going easy on the opponent had actually turned into lightning. The instantaneous increase in speed was more than 10 times. Each of the 4 Seasons Tower's men, who were sent out to fight, had a wealth of combat experience. They had been through more than 100 battles in their lifetime. However, even though these 7 men had lived for close to 10,000 years, they had never encountered such a bizarre situation. What he wielded was a saber, not a bolt of lightning in the sky that could be as long as it wanted to be. This was a transformation that exceeded the logic of any ordinary person. The saber light turned from a bolt of lightning into a murderous gleam that cut through the heaven and earth. January, February, and Moons, who bore the brunt of the attack, made a serious misjudgment of the sudden change in the situation. They almost didn't have any time to react. With a flash of light, they were all cut into 2 and died just like that. Their cultivation path was painted like a cake. Until the very last moment, their faces still carried a mocking smile towards the saber. Yin Yang had planned this attack before he acted, setting up the trap first. He did not hold back once he struck. killing 3 men consecutively when they least expected it. Even after successfully killing 3 men, the saber's momentum did not falter as it chased after the 4th man. The saber light plunged straight down. In fact, the 4th man had died because of the saber as well. It was just that when Yun Yang killed the 4th man, a loud clang was heard when the saber swept past the man's waist. It was as if the saber had struck an extremely sturdy piece of metal. Although the 4th man had died from the slash, the unparalleled momentum of the saber had to stop because of it. The saber did not belong to the human realm. When everyone reacted, some of it had already ended. Everything happened so suddenly. Only after a moment did blood soar into the sky. The smell of blood instantly assaulted the nostrils and swept through the surroundings. The remaining 3 men stared at Yin Yang in disbelief, and then at the ground, their eyes reddened. It was only now that they realized just how murderous that slash was. But what followed was endless grief and indignation. They had been fighting side by side for so many years, but 4 of them had died in the blink of an eye under the other party's single slash. Moreover, it was done in such a strange way, under the watchful eyes of everyone. How could the rest of them endure this? Despicable. Spring was no longer able to maintain his elegant demeanor, and he roared furiously, his eyes about to split open. Despicable? Is it really despicable? Yun Yang held the divine edge that had reverted to its original length and said in slight surprise, "This is the final battle. Any means should be used, any means should be used. This is a cliché. I'm used to reminding my enemies, enlightening them for the rest of their lives, so that they won't regret even in death. What I find strange is that you all know that the battle has already begun. Even though I struck first, you all could have dodged it. Why didn't you? Couldn't you wait to die?" The 3 of them almost spat blood in anger at his words. Dodging? How could we? How could we dodge this strange attack that we had never dreamt of even 1,000 times in our lives? How could we dodge it? Reminding our enemies, enlightening them for the rest of their lives, so that they won't regret even in death? If you're so eloquent, why don't you just go to heaven and pretend to be a wise man in heaven and enlighten the masses? Fortunately, the 3 of them were experienced cultivators whose cultivation base and state of mind had reached the pinnacle. With a long howl of grief and indignation, they calmed themselves and launched a counterattack at the same time. Naturally, they turned into a triangular offensive formation, surrounding Yin Yang from 3 directions. A saber, a sword, and a flute. The sharp sound of the wind breaking rang through the peak, filling the eyes with ghostly shrieks. The divine edge that had reverted to its original size danced rapidly in Yin Yang's hand. The saber light changed and blocked the 3 of them. Although he was besieged, he did not retreat an inch. Yin Yang did not use saber truth, destiny blade to attack. How could he really reveal his trump card before the enemy appeared? However, the vigorous and abundant mystical chi made every slash of his saber filled with an unstoppable, domineering aura. Spring and the 2 envoys suppressed the extreme grief and indignation in their hearts, and fought with all their might, wanting nothing more than to grind Yin Yang's bones into dust with a single strike. It was a pity that the 3 of them could only fight Yin Yang to a draw despite their combined efforts. Jilingxi stood on the side, watching the battle with rapt attention. Then, she heaved a soft sigh of relief. Yin Yang's first strike had caught the enemy off guard, and killed more than half of the enemy's combat power. Now he had even taken the initiative to control the battle. The current situation was not a problem at all. The so-called siege was more of Yin Yang's accumulation of power and preparation for the upcoming battle. After all, there were at least 22 superb experts hiding in the forest, waiting for a chance to strike. Since Yin Yang's side was safe, she would focus her attention on the ambushes that had yet to appear. It was better to be safe than sorry. At this time, Jilingxi was surprised to find that the corpse of the 4 Seasons Tower's divine envoy, who was dressed in yellow clothes, was glowing with a yellow light. The yellow light was mainly distributed in 2 places, one on the neck and the other on the waist. Jilingxi watched for a while longer, and could not help but feel that something was amiss. Profound cultivators had different attributes in their cultivation methods. It was not surprising that the mystical chi that was condensed to protect, or even attack, was mixed with a unique glow. Water, fire, wind, and thunder each had their own hue. However, no matter how outstanding a cultivator was, once he died, his chi would dissipate, and his cultivation method would vanish along with his life. Now that the divine envoy had been sliced into two by Yin Yang's saber, and could not be more dead, why was his body still glowing? Ji Lingxi observed carefully, and realized that it was definitely not the reflection of a weapon. It was really the glow of the dead body. Then the question was, what was going on? It was very unusual. Ji Lingxi's heart skipped a beat. She extended her hand and made a grabbing motion, causing the corpse on the ground to fly towards her. Chapter 834. It was Mr. Nian, who had spoken to Yin Yang earlier. Before Ji Lingxi could speak, Mr. Nian had already vanished with the corpse in his arms. He did not seem to care about his three subordinates, who were locked in a bitter battle not far away, and were in danger of being overturned at any moment. Yin Yang brandished his saber and forced Spring back 30 feet. He laughed and said, "Mr. Nian, so many people around here are just here to watch? Both sides are on the same page. A battle of life and death is bound to happen sooner or later. Why not come forward and have a good fight?" Mr. Nian's voice drifted over slowly. "In this final battle, I have to give you the respect you deserve as Supreme Cloud. It's hard to be fair when the martial world's grudges are settled. However, in this final battle of life and death that was initiated by Lord Supreme Cloud, not only do we have the advantage of setting up the spiritual restraining formation first, we also have the advantage of numbers. Let's create a relatively fair battle environment as a form of repayment." Yin Yang smiled faintly. "Fair? No matter how fair it is, it's still a battle of numbers. Why do you have to deceive yourself and deceive others? Such an act will only make others despise you even more." There was a hint of amusement in Mr. Nian's voice. "Whether we deceive ourselves or not depends on the person. Our main strategy in this battle is indeed to swarm forward and end this battle as soon as possible. However, Spring has volunteered to measure Supreme Cloud's worth first. As the leader, I have to fulfill this old official's wish and let him fight you with his own strategy. Life and death, no regrets." Yin Yang was moved. "Even if we die because of this, the dead are gone. What about those who are lucky enough to survive? There are so many of you here. Are you just going to watch?" Mr. Nian's voice was indifferent. "Life and death are the same. Even if we die because of this, it's a choice made by Spring and his subordinates. This is the decision of all of us. Not only is it out of respect for you, it's also out of respect for our own lives and deaths. No matter what happened in the past, we have to bear the consequences of our own choices on the battlefield. No matter how anxious we are now, we can only wait until the outcome of the battle is clear." Yin Yang let out a long howl and said, "I understand now. If so, I shall send these three on their way first. I can't bear to let you all feel as if your hearts are frying in oil, so I shall grant you a quick death." Before he finished speaking, the saber move suddenly changed. The saber light spread out in all directions like a rippling light wave. In an instant, it engulfed the entire area, including the entire area. The blade was merciless, and the Tao was merciless. One move and two styles converged. With a whooshing sound, the saber light shone brightly. The three of them had a strange feeling at the same time. At this moment, they weren't facing a single person, but the might of the grand Tao that they'd been pursuing all their lives. Every cultivator who embarked on this path of cultivation could only rely on their own efforts to defy the heavens and go against the current. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. As long as there was the slightest mistake, there would be no mercy. This was the ultimate truth of cultivation, a truth that every profound cultivator knew. However, at this moment, all three of them were shocked to realize that the path they had taken had been wrong from the beginning. Even though they had stumbled their way to where they were now and persevered until now, there was no way to go on, and the future was bleak. The Spring Bearer's expression turned ghastly as he yelled at the sky, "Am I wrong? So it turns out that the path I took was actually the wrong one? Have I made so many mistakes?" Amidst the screams, he was dazed and suddenly stunned. However, It was this moment of distraction that allowed a ray of saber light to sweep past his body. A body quietly split into two halves. The upper half flew out diagonally and landed on the ground, but he clearly didn't feel the slightest pain. He raised his head and asked the sky, "Is it really wrong? Then, what is the right thing to do?" Before he could finish his sentence, the upper half of his body fell to the sky, no longer breathing. The illusory path of Tao suddenly split in a flash. Another two clangs rang out as the two gods' envoys were struck one after another, bleeding profusely and severely injured. However, both of them had God's bones, and their physical strength was much stronger than that of others. They didn't die immediately, but their gazes were still dazed as they murmured, "Wrong? How could it be wrong?" Yin Yang snorted and said, "The emergence of the Nine Supremes is driven by Tao, driven by heaven's will. The Four Seasons Tower is defying heaven's will. How can it not be wrong?" The two men's gazes were dazed for a moment, but then they became unusually fierce and ruthless. They yelled angrily, "The cultivation of the human body is to cultivate from the mortal body to the realm of immortality. Who isn't going against the current, going against heaven's will? Why are we the ones who are wrong?" Despite the two men's cries, the path of Tao in the sky clearly showed that they were wrong. They were wrong. Were they wrong? The two of them suddenly felt disheartened. The bright heaven's will in the sky was telling them everything. "Your path is wrong. There was no way forward." The two men roared, "We have God's bones in us. We're gods when we gather them. What did we do wrong? What's wrong with that?" As they screamed, they swung their sabers with all their might, blocking the countless saber lights from the path of Tao. The saber lights in the sky changed, and the door of Tao was also changing endlessly. It seemed to be saying one thing. "You've installed God's bones in your bodies, but you didn't cultivate them yourself after all. So you're wrong. Even if you're gods in your eyes, why are you all a pile of bones in the end? Because they're not real gods after all. If so, they're already wrong, but you're still walking on a path that's even more wrong. Aren't you all even more wrong? Adding mistakes on top of mistakes, how can you still live?" The two men listened to the voice of Tao as they defended. Suddenly they felt hopeless. Mistakes on top of mistakes. Mistakes on top of mistakes. Amidst the screams, the determination to die in their eyes suddenly turned into despair. "Since we're wrong, what's the point of living?" Laughing bitterly, they pounced forward. Facing the divine edge, they did not evade, not fearing death at all. Saber Laic. A red mist suddenly appeared descending from the sky. What appeared with the blurry light and shadow seemed to be another world of mortals. Seeing such a strange scene, both of them were shocked. Although they swung their swords to the left and right with all their might, they no longer had any offensive power to speak of. A faint mist-like saber light flashed past the necks of the two people. The outcome was decided. Two large human heads flew out, rolling in the air. However, the two men looked strangely calm. It was as if they had finally been freed, as if they had finally found the path of Tao. Wherever the saber light passed, blood splattered on the ground, overturning the mortal world. Yin Yang retracted his saber and stood upright, murmuring to himself, "So this is the real Destiny blade. Every slash is God's will." Previously, when he had used Saber Truth, Destiny blade, it had always been a man wielding the saber, winning the battle with exquisite saber skills. This time, however, Emmy was fully focused, handing all of its power to Yin Yang. Emmy's deific consciousness had even merged with Yin Yang's, allowing Yin Yang to discover the deeper essence of Saber Truth. Destiny Blade for the first time. The power of Destiny Blade that he had unleashed in the past was only the tip of the iceberg. It was like scratching an itch through one's boot. It had yet to achieve its true meaning. Chapter 835. Soft sighs could be heard coming from the dark forest. A few silhouettes in yellow drifted out and moved the remains of the 6 corpses into the Temple of 9 Supremes, settling them down appropriately. One of them had just walked out of the temple when he smiled faintly. "Lord Supreme Cloud is indeed worthy of the title of Supreme Wit. You're wise and resourceful indeed. The saber in your hand is marvelous and helpful." His words were insinuating that Yin Yang's ability to easily kill the 7 men was due to his strange weapon. Furthermore, he was hoping that Yin Yang would lose his composure after his great victory. Furthermore, he was young and impetuous. If he did not use this weapon, the other side would have taken advantage of him. Yin Yang replied faintly, I was the one who initiated this battle. How can I be unprepared when facing a situation where I'm outnumbered in this battle of life and death? It's my fortune to be in possession of a weapon. Are you questioning the fairness of your esteemed tower's words? Yin Yang's reply was to use his own words against his own shield. You say that I won with a weapon and waver my state of mind. I'll say that you're dissatisfied with the other side's leader's main idea and disturb your Tao heart. Let's see who will give in first. The person said coldly, Supreme Cloud, there's no need to speak irresponsibly and sow discord. I've long been indifferent to matters of life and death. However, the debt of blood is still fresh in my mind. There must be recompense. Yin Yang replied mockingly, the debt of blood is still fresh in my mind? What I'm doing now is exactly what you've said. It's a pity that Lord Supreme Cloud's ultimate move can only be used once. I hope Lord Supreme Cloud has some other luck. Otherwise, you'll be a harbinger of misfortune, and blood will be spilled everywhere. The person snorted coldly and disappeared into the dense forest in a flash. The ground was still drenched in fresh blood, but Jilingxi and Yin Yang were the only ones left alive. However, both of them knew that the real battle had only begun from this moment onwards. In the initial battle just now, Mr. Nian had used the lives of 7 men to completely suppress the Four Seasons Tower's contempt towards Supreme Cloud. Of course, this result was largely due to the Spring Bringer's dissatisfaction. But at the end of the day, if they did not let someone try and see what was going on, everyone would inevitably be dissatisfied. After all, no matter how much Yin Yang's cultivation base had improved and how strong he seemed to be, he did not have a battle record that was worthy of it. Moreover, he was trapped in the spiritual restraining formation, unable to use the manifestation powers that he was famous for. It was only natural that he would be looked down upon. In spite of this, Yin Yang and Mr. Nian were certain that if they were to recklessly go up against Supreme Cloud with the mentality of dealing with an ant, it was still unknown whether Yin Yang would be finished, but the Four Seasons Tower's loss would definitely be much more than these 7 people. If they were not careful, the Four Seasons Tower's top-notch combat power might be completely annihilated. On the surface, it looked like the Four Seasons Tower had lost 7 experts, but no one had underestimated their enemy. It was worth it, and he died a worthy death. Now no matter who it was, no one would treat Supreme Cloud as an ordinary opponent. The Four Seasons Tower's mentality now was that Yin Yang was an unparalleled expert, who had even surpassed Ling Xiaozui back in the day. The situation before them was clear. Although Yin Yang's first successful slash was due to using a mystical saber that no one knew about and catching them off guard, Yin Yang was still the one who had firmly suppressed and controlled the entire situation when he faced the 3 men's joint attack. Furthermore, not only was Yin Yang not injured after killing these 3 men, his breathing did not even become heavier. This meant that Yin Yang's mystical qi consumption was limited in the intense battle just now. Even if it was not negligible, it would have a limited impact on the subsequent battle. If the Four Seasons Tower's men who had come to this conclusion still could not see how terrifying Yin Yang was, then they could really just line up under a crooked tree and hang themselves. Light clouds floated in the sky as the north wind blew, and the sun shone brightly. It was already noon. In spite of this, the forest on Tianxian Cliff was shrouded in darkness. The visibility was terrifyingly low. From afar, Fu Baogua and the others could see that Tianxian Cliff was shrouded in thick fog that obscured the entire mountain ridge. The fog gradually spread to the surroundings, and in just a short period of time, nothing could be seen anymore. Only the faint chimes of swords and sabers could be heard from time to time, indicating that the war of the century was still ongoing. Yin Yang walked slowly in the thick fog while Jilingxi, who was wielding a long sword, was in front of him. Jilingxi insisted on walking in front of Yin Yang to ensure that everything was safe. Unable to dissuade her, Yin Yang could only agree. After all, based on the current situation, this was the best strategy. Right now, the enemies were all hidden in the dark. If the two of them still did not move in front of the temple, they would definitely become targets. The only way was to take the initiative to move. Even though they still did not know where the enemies were hiding, as long as they moved, they would not fall into the extremely bad situation of being surrounded by 22 people. With Jilingxi leading the way, this strategy of turning passivity into initiative was further perfected. The Four Seasons Tower might be able to tell from Jilingxi's movements, aura and other aspects that her ability was extraordinary, perhaps even above Yun Yang's, but it was impossible for them to know that her greatest trump card was the red light barrier. After all, to Jilingxi, it was no longer a matter of whether or not she was afraid to fight. She was afraid that she would not fight. Just as both of them stepped into a thick bush, the ground caved in without a sound. This change happened abruptly, and the area of the collapse was as large as 100 feet in radius. Following the abrupt change, two beams of saber and sword light shot towards them from 4 different directions, still silent and undetectable. All of this was like a pantomime that was happening in a completely dark space. The entire process was soundless, but it was filled with murderous intent. Both Yun Yang and Jilingxi were on high alert. They had floated up the moment the ground caved in. However, their action of floating up seemed to be automatically sending themselves up for the other party's attack. 8 beams of cold light shot towards them at the same time, their timing perfect. It was obvious that they had already predicted Yun Yang and Jilingxi's movements, and had already planned their follow-up attacks. In spite of this, Yun Yang and Jilingxi did not panic in the face of the attacks coming from all directions. They did not stop floating and pounce forward, one from the left and the other from the right. They were as silent as ghosts. Yun Yang's silent counterattack was instantaneous. His upended river of blood spilled out. The saber light that hung from the sky had already blocked all the incoming sharp beams of energy, producing a tinkling sound. Amidst the momentary stalemate, the next reincarnation under saber counterattacked with full force. Chapter 836. Only at the farthest end of this dark path, as if it was the end of the sky, was a faint glimmer that could only be vaguely seen, but could not be seen clearly. Although they did not know what path it was, and there were no hints, all the enemies who were attacking Yun Yang had a clear understanding in their hearts. It was the path of reincarnation. Legend had it that only the underworld's underworld had a reincarnation passage. This pitch-black road seemed to be able to attract all the attention of the witnesses. It was filled with an indescribable temptation, causing everyone's mind to be in turmoil when they saw it. In a trance, they could not help but think of their past and present lives. The unique light of reincarnation under saber shone in front of him. As Yun Yang struck, he felt his wrist vibrate violently as a powerful force surged towards him. Then, he felt the resistance vanish and relaxed. Then a low grunt came from afar. Yun Yang's thoughts raced as he quickly deduced that it was his divine edge clashing with the other party's weapon that caused the initial head-on feeling. The other party's cultivation base was impressive, otherwise, how could the residual force have affected him? In spite of this, the divine edge's unparalleled sharpness continued, breaking the other party's weapon, after only a brief stalemate, and injuring the other party. The silhouette in the dark flickered again, as 2 more rays of light shot towards Yun Yang. Just as Yun Yang's saber broke a person's weapon, and took the opportunity to injure him, they had already arrived in front of Yun Yang. Yun Yang dared not delay as he retreated swiftly. As the saber light turned and swept horizontally, his right palm slammed behind him as well. With a loud boom, the ambusher from behind was sent flying by his palm, while the long sword of the ambusher from the other side was broken by the divine edge. However, there was a limit to one's strength. Even though Yun Yang had parried with all his might, it was still difficult for him to evade the last attack. He could only tilt his body slightly as a sharp gleam flashed past his chest. Despite the pain in Yun Yang's chest, he had already retracted his saber and retaliated with merciless Dao. The force of his attack was several times more ferocious than before. With a crisp clang, the last attacker from all 4 directions somersaulted away. As that person retreated, The enemies from all four directions retreated at the same time, as if they had discussed it beforehand. On the other side, Jilingxi's long sword was moving in a disorderly manner. Her movements were as dazzling as fireworks, but she was only attacking without defending, surprising her four opponents. In this world, how could there be a girl with such profound cultivation, such explosive battle prowess, and such a valiant fighting style? Seeing is better than hearing 100 times. However, to fight us with such a flawed fighting style, no matter how high his cultivation base is, he will still die. How can there be a fluke? The moment their eyes met, both of them had already made the first move. They worked together to parry Jilingxi's sword, while one of them channeled his palm energy to divert Jilingxi's right hand away. The last of them found an opening and darted to Jilingxi's right side, slashing down with his saber. His target was the vital part of Jilingxi's slender neck, showing no mercy at all. At this point in the battle, Jilingxi was already on the brink of death. Even with a ridiculously high cultivation base, it was impossible for her to take on such an attack that was aimed at her vitals. In spite of this, Jilingxi did not seem to feel anything. She was still madly channeling her strength to attack the twin swords in front of her, determined to break through the interception and claim the enemy's life. In the blink of an eye, the saber light was like lightning. With a loud thud, it had already landed precisely on Jilingxi's neck. The person who had attacked extended his other hand with his fingers spread wide, obviously planning to behead Jilingxi, and carry it away with his other hand to intimidate Yun Yang later. Once he thought about how he had beheaded Yun Yang's right-hand man, a confidant with unfathomable abilities, and how he would toss the beautiful head in front of Yun Yang later, he would like to see if this supreme cloud, who had awed the continent, would break down at once and have his soul dissipate. The person's gaze was cruel, his hand ready to strike. However, at the next moment he was stunned. The powerful strike that could split mountains and split rocks had landed on the vital part of Jilingxi's neck, but her head had not been chopped off. No, not only had it not been chopped off, there was no sense of impact at all. Well, what was going on? Could it be that this woman's defensive cultivation method was unique? Was that why she was attacking without any defense at all? As the thought flashed through his mind, he saw a flash of red light rise. What was going on? Was this a sign of a unique cultivation method? The person who attacked saw that the red light was gradually expanding, and it was actually rushing towards me? What the hell is this? Why is it so strange? The person's train of thought came to an abrupt halt at this moment. Because at this moment, he suddenly had a feeling that his body seemed to have collided with a mountain that had flown hundreds of thousands of miles in the blink of an eye. If he had to describe it, perhaps it could be described in a way that everyone could understand. A sports car that was speeding at high speed had crashed into a high-speed train that was traveling at full speed. Furthermore, it had collided head-on with the high-speed train. Then there was a loud crash. The other three people who were defending against Jilingxi's relentless attacks looked over in surprise, only to see their comrade fly up in confusion. Like an eagle, he opened his arms and soared into the sky at high speed. If you are an eagle, then soar into the sky. Yes, this comrade's posture was too similar. However, why did this eagle soar into the sky at an unparalleled speed and not come down for a long time? Then the answer was revealed. The figure that soared into the sky was clearly still ascending, but his body seemed to be unable to bear the burden and was disintegrating. Yes, it was disintegrating. His head, limbs, and body had all fallen apart. Could it be that he had soared too fast, and the air resistance was too strong, causing his body to disintegrate? The minds of the three people spun quickly, but they still could not figure out what was going on. How could everything be so strange? The woman in front of them was still maintaining her aggressive attack mode, the sword in her hand exerting 300% of its power. The reason was simple. She was not defending at all. Offense was the best defense. But it did not mean that one should not defend at all. That's right. Didn't I just see someone chop her neck with a knife? That was a direct hit. Why could she still attack? It was then that Jilingxi realized that no matter how hard she tried to attack, she still could not do anything to the three men who were working together to neutralize her attacks. In a fit of rage, she suddenly hollered and sheathed her sword, charging straight at the 3 men. What kind of strategy was this? How could there be such a strategy in this world? This was no longer fearless, it was simply courting death, okay? The 3 people were shocked to see this. There must be something wrong with this abnormal behavior. There must be something fishy about the other party's actions. When she was in a fit of rage, 2 of them dared not act rashly, retreating swiftly as Ji Lingxi charged at the person in the middle like a mad bull. Seeing that he could not dodge in time, the person in the front thrust his sword out without hesitation, striking Ji Lingxi's heart. Chapter 837. The sword had pierced right into her heart. The man was still in disbelief when his strike landed. This woman's real cultivation base is more than a level higher than mine. It's just that her combat experience is shallow. How could she have been stabbed in the heart without any resistance? The thought ended there. There was no room for it to continue, because the moment the sword was pierced, a red light appeared as expected. A massive force of recoil surged forth. Then, the sword turned into dust with a puff, and the red light swept over. The other party was shocked, and hurriedly withdrew his hand, wanting to dodge as fast as possible. Unfortunately, the red light was too fast, or at least much faster than he had imagined. A massive force came into contact with his hand. He felt that his right hand that could split tigers and leopards had vanished without a trace. Yes, it had vanished. He did not even have the time to feel the pain. It was gone in an instant, and the red light was already in front of the man. The man was flung away, but he managed to react in time. He shouted loudly, "There's something strange about this woman. There's a recoil." Before he could finish his words, he had been flung thousands of feet away by the red light, and was torn into pieces. He died without a complete corpse. The other 2 men watched as another of their companions was mysteriously flung to death. His body was torn into pieces, and he died horribly. Faced with such an anomaly, they could not help breaking out in cold sweat, their hair standing on end. What was going on? How could 2 brothers who had been with each other for thousands of years be flung away so swiftly and dismembered? They had never seen such a strange thing in their lives. One of them had slashed someone's neck and died from the recoil. The other had stabbed his sword into someone's heart and died from the recoil. No matter how they looked at it, it was too surreal. It was equally shocking. The battle was complicated and tedious to describe with words, but the actual process had happened in the blink of an eye. It had happened, passed, disappeared, and everything was over. The other party disappeared from the thick fog and retreated. In the blink of an eye, the turbulent fog calmed down. Yun Yang retrieved the divine edge from the thick fog. As expected, he saw a line of blood slowly trickling down the blade's blade. Just like before, in the blink of an eye, the blade of the saber regained its snow-white luster, untainted by even a speck of dust. It was like a stream of autumn water overflowing in the thick fog, sparkling and radiating brilliance. Looking at the saber in his hand, she murmured, "Legend has it that some treasured sabers have the mystical effect of automatically absorbing the fog in places like this. I wonder if it's true. Can this saber of yours do the same?" Ji Lingxi had no idea when she had come to his side. Looking at the flawless saber that was getting brighter and brighter in the thick fog, Yun Yang said faintly, "This saber of mine has such a mystical ability. However, what we see now is the fog formed by the formation. Even if the saber can absorb the fog is produced continuously. The effect of a unilateral absorption is minimal and not very useful. But this saber has other uses in the thick fog." Yin Yang chuckled softly. "There were a total of 8 people in this wave of attack, right?" Ji Lingxi asked excitedly. "How many did you kill?" Yin Yang coughed dryly and thought about it carefully before saying, "It seems like 2 of them were injured, but they've all escaped. The other party's abilities are formidable, and they're opportunistic. It's not easy to kill them." Ji Lingxi chuckled. "How is it not easy to kill them? I killed 2 of them without much effort." What she meant was that he did not kill a single one of them, while she killed 2 effortlessly. The sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. Yin Yang coughed. "Was it really effortless? Then you didn't kill them." but shocked them? His tone sounded like a question, but it was actually a direct confirmation that the matter had been decided. Lingxi snorted and stood with her arms behind her back. She lifted her head and said faintly, "I've never cared about the process when I do things. I only look at the results. If the enemy is dead, then they're dead. If it was effortless, then it was effortless. This is the truth, the indisputable truth. The rest is not up for discussion." What a strong reason. It was hard to refute. Yun Yang had no energy to retort at this moment. He only had the urge to grab the girl and spank her bottom. However, it was only a thought. He could not put it into action. After all, the red light was cold and did not differentiate friend from foe. It was merciless when it came to dealing with him. Fiancé, sweetheart, all of them were suppressed mercilessly. After all, this child was the biggest enemy of the person who had set up the red light. He was a little white pig who had taken the white jade cabbage. How could he have the audacity to grumble when he was incompetent? On the other side, none of the Four Seasons Tower's men were waiting at their original ambush positions. Instead, they had gathered at a secluded spot. Among them, there were a few whose expressions were completely unsightly. They were extremely unsightly. Two of them who were injured had slightly better complexions. Although they appeared weary, their fighting spirit had not waned. However, the other two, although they were not injured, their faces were deathly pale, paler than a dead person's face. Their eyes were filled with fear, like birds startled by the twang of a bowstring. In a constant state of anxiety, the entire secret valley was silent. When the crowd looked at Mr. Nian, their gazes were evasive. Mr. Nian looked at the 19 men in front of him. After a moment of silence, he said, "Now, who else thinks that Supreme Cloud's reputation is undeserved? Who else thinks that Supreme Cloud can't withstand a single blow and can be easily killed? Step forward." No one uttered a sound. Supreme Cloud's only reliance was his manifestation powers. He himself was merely a weakling. After this battle, the knowledge of his mediocre ability had long become a thing of the past. Mr. Nian stood up with his arms on his back and said faintly, "Then, who else thinks that you have the ability to fight alone? Please step forward and challenge Supreme Cloud. I'm glad to see you succeed. I'll send you off with all sincerity." Still no one moved. Everyone present was aware of Yin Yang's ability, and he was assisted by the peerless blade. What was the difference between fighting him alone and seeking death? Mr. Nian said softly, "Yutong's Supreme Cloud is renowned throughout the world. He became one of the 9 Supremes at such a young age, stirring the winds and clouds of Tianxian. He's always been one of the 9 Supreme strategists. He's the brainchild of the 9 Supremes. Victory can be decided from 1,000 miles away, within his command tent. It can even be said that Supreme Cloud alone can shoulder half of the great reputation that the 9 Supremes have built throughout their journey, perhaps more. When the 9 Supremes were still around, perhaps Supreme Earth's planning was part of it, but Supreme Cloud's role in it was still not to be underestimated. After such a long time in searching the world, their true identities still couldn't be found. How could Supreme Earth plan so thoroughly alone? Thinking deeper, is Supreme Cloud's title of Supreme Wit just a rumor? Or does he live up to his name? Is he truly worthy of his reputation? Chapter 838. After the incident at Tianxian Cliff, Supreme Cloud was lucky to escape, but he was still gravely injured. Now that we've gathered the past information, the reason why he was called a good-for-nothing back then was because he had healed himself with a lot of heaven and earth treasures, and the flesh of spiritual beasts due to his severe injuries. The process took more than 8 months. It was about a year after the battle at Tianxian Cliff that our Four Seasons Tower spies were uprooted one by one. This proves that Supreme Cloud had launched an operation as soon as he returned to Tiantang City. He found clues in an extremely short amount of time and captured the culprit. What do you think of this wisdom? Mr. Nian looked at the crowd. Even without the wisdom and setup, Supreme Cloud's ability back then was nothing more than an ant. Yet, it was his meager ability that turned the Four Seasons Tower upside down. All of you call yourselves veterans of the martial world, arrogantly challenging the heavens and the earth. Yet you can't even catch him. You're nothing but a laughing stock. Today, Supreme Cloud's ability has improved tremendously. Yet all of you are still standing where you are, overtaken and suppressed by others. Today, Supreme Cloud has jumped out and proposed a decisive battle. All of you will only blame it on me. Why didn't you agree to it immediately? Why didn't you act immediately? All of you are blindly optimistic that this is the best time to eradicate Supreme Cloud. All of you think that this battle is enough to settle everything once and for all. What a beautiful dream. It's a pity that all of you are too ugly. No matter how beautiful your dreams are, it's all in vain. Why didn't all of you think about why Supreme Cloud, a wise man, would propose a decisive battle at this time? Mr. Nian's cold gaze looked at the crowd. In other words, if he wasn't confident, why would he propose a decisive battle so hastily? Has Supreme Cloud suddenly become stupid? Is he rushing to his death? Haven't any of you thought about it? If Supreme Cloud isn't confident in his revenge, why would he propose a decisive battle at this time? The longer this drags on, the more secure his status as a human legend will be. There's still room for improvement in his ability. Then the next question is, what gives him such confidence? Against the entire Four Seasons Tower, what else can guarantee his revenge other than absolute combat power? Mr. Nian smirked as he looked at them one by one. What happened now proves that you didn't take these facts to heart at all. I've said more than once that to deal with Yin Yang, the current Supreme Cloud, the danger must be higher than that of Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou. You lot may have agreed verbally, but you're not convinced in your hearts. You're even complaining about my arrangements. The final battle is at hand, yet you're letting your personal pride occupy the majority of your thoughts. Spring is the representative, but when you personally saw Spring fighting, what was the result? All 7 of them were wiped out in an instant. The dense fog attack had also confined the battle within the spiritual restraining array. It could be said that they had the geographical advantage. But in the end, the second time the 8 of them attacked together, 2 were injured and 2 were killed. Mr. Nian said with a pained tone. 29 of the Four Seasons Tower's pinnacle combatants are here. Each of them can be independent in the martial world. They can dominate an area. But after just one exchange, 9 of them died. Do you think that this reality is inevitable? What do you mean by Supreme Cloud's saber is unparalleled? Why had he not thought of it earlier? Yin Yang had only possessed this godly weapon today. Isn't a weapon a part of a weapon grandmaster's ability? The person who said this should be beaten to death. He knew that he had lost the right time, place, and manpower, yet he still came to the battle. What's so strange about having a unique weapon? Don't tell me that you've never guarded against your opponent's weapon when you fight? You've been killed just like that, yet you still have the face to cry injustice? How am I being wronged? As for the girl's peculiarity, Mr. Nian sighed. Shouldn't she be? Isn't this reasonable and expected? If there's nothing peculiar about her, why would Supreme Cloud bring such a delicate little girl to this final battle? Just because she's capable and can fight? Mr. Nian said heavily and angrily. In a battle like this, anyone Supreme Cloud can bring here must be of great help to him. Since they're of great help to him, they're also of great harm to us. Isn't this little bit of knowledge expected and reasonable? Do I even need to say it? All of you are veterans of the martial world for over 1,000 years. Isn't thinking of defeat the key to victory the key to a final battle? Why wouldn't you all be extremely cautious of the helper he brought? Someone whose identity and background we don't know at all. Why didn't he bring Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou? Why did he bring this little girl instead? Has no one thought about this? Only when you've been injured and killed did you come running over to say that there's something wrong with Supreme Cloud's saber. That there's something wrong with Supreme Cloud's woman. Are all of you idiots? Have all of you wasted your lives after so many years? How could you make such a low-level mistake? How could you all complain that I shouldn't have paid so much attention to Supreme Cloud? Where are your hearts? Mr. Nian rubbed the space between his brows tiredly. What else do you have to say now? What else can you say? Say it. A middle-aged man dressed in red sighed soundlessly, his face filled with shame. This person was Summer Bringer. Initially, he had the same thought as Spring Bringer, who had died in Yun Yang's hands. If Springbringer had not taken the initiative, he might have been the first to die in Yun Yang's hands, as he had the same thought. Looking at it now, there was only endless lingering fear, the fear of death and the unknown. What's the point of talking about the past? Are you watching so many brothers die in vain in Supreme Cloud's hands, because of this *T reason? Winterbringer, who was dressed in white, asked with a frown. A disunited team might as well not exist at all. Mr. Nyen said faintly, "What does it matter if disobedient and untrustworthy subordinates die? If we can survive, who knows how many enemies of the same level we'll have to face in the future? Even if I save them today, it's inevitable that they'll die in the hands of others. If so, it's better for those with ulterior motives to die here and now. After all, only by speaking with reality can one remember it vividly and never forget it. Even if there's only one subordinate left in the end, I hope that it's the one who has absolute trust in the right leader." Someone said with dissatisfaction, "Must there be ulterior motives if there's doubt and objection?" Mr. Nyen replied indifferently, "In my opinion, there must be ulterior motives." He stood with his arms behind his back and took 2 slow steps before he sat down and said faintly, "Come and study this. See if there's any way to avoid Supreme Cloud's saber. Also look at that strange girl. What's so magical about her? How should we deal with her?" Chapter 839. Mr. Nyen waited for the crowd's response after he finished speaking, but no one spoke for a long time. They all chose to remain silent. The 19 men did not make a sound, their expressions growing darker. They were either ghastly or cold. None of them were calm anymore. After a long while, someone finally spoke. According to the information we've gathered, the following conclusion can be drawn about Yin Yang's saber. Not only is this saber exceptionally sharp, it's also able to lengthen and shorten as it pleases. It's impossible to defend against and impossible to defend against. The weapons in our hands are top-notch weapons in this world, but under his saber, they'll be damaged at most for an instant. This alone is already a huge problem that's difficult to solve. One of the men stood up with blood dripping from his chest and said, "I have the right to speak on this point. Yin Yang's actual cultivation base is profound, but he's only one person after all. However, with his treasured saber in hand, his combat power has increased by more than a few times. We really can't defend against Yin Yang's sharpness. If we're careless, we'll be beheaded and sent to the underworld. If we don't solve this, I can't think of any chance of winning. We don't even know. We're not sure how many times our weapons can withstand the treasured saber's impact. This is the so-called saber-tip drill. Yin Yang's toughness is more than beyond our expectations. He's even scarier than Ling Xiaozui and Duga Cho working together. With our strength, even if we're going against 2 generations of unrivaled experts, we can still hold our own for a while without luck. However, when we're up against Yun Yang, it's hard to even hold our own. Furthermore, Yin Yang's cultivation base is exceptionally impressive. Although it's only been 2 short exchanges, his aura, combat power, and explosive force are all there. He's almost at the level of a leader. To be fair, even without this saber in hand, he's still a top-notch expert who doesn't pale in comparison to Ling Xiaozui back in the day. Furthermore, the combat power he's displaying now might not even be his limit. Do you know how much of his ability Yin Yang is using now? 70%, 90%, 100%, or perhaps only 50%. There's also something else that shouldn't be overlooked. The saber style that Yin Yang used was equally exquisite, the most exquisite I've ever seen in my life. But in terms of techniques, perhaps in this world, there is no one else who can match him. Combining these 3 advantages, with his unparalleled cultivation base, his unparalleled treasured saber, and his marvelous skill, Yin Yang alone is as dangerous as 3 Ling Xiaozui combined. The man let out a deep sigh. The chief's previous concerns were not wrong at all. We were too careless and underestimated the enemy. It was not that Yin Yang was overestimating the other party and destroying his own morale, but from the bottom of his heart, if he did not come up with any tricks in this battle, and wanted to retreat in one piece, there was at least an 80% chance that Yun Yang could fulfill his wish. But on our side. At this point, he suddenly stopped and didn't continue. However, everyone understood what he meant. The current situation was that Yun Yang could leave if he wanted to, and they did not have much confidence in stopping him. Even if the battle came to a certain stage, Yun Yang could still come and go as he pleased to ensure his own safety. Even if they did not win this time, there was still room for a comeback. On the other hand, the Four Seasons Tower would suffer a huge loss and would not be able to lock onto the outcome of the battle. This was not an outcome that they would be happy to see, but it was the most likely outcome right now. Everyone's expression grew increasingly grim. Before Yun Yang's arrival, before the battle began, the Four Seasons Tower's people were brimming with confidence. They all thought that Yun Yang's identity had been exposed, and that he had chosen to start the final battle out of helplessness. They were forced by the situation, and had no choice but to do so. Victory was within their grasp. There was no doubt about the outcome of this battle from the very beginning. However, the reality now was almost the complete opposite. That woman's bizarre backlash is even more terrifying. Another person who had fought with Jilingxi was still pale. The two brothers clearly hit their targets earlier. There's no doubt about it. One of them slashed at her neck with a saber, but was sent flying into the air and torn into pieces in midair. The other person stabbed her heart with a sword but died from the backlash as well. What's more terrifying is that she's actually unscathed despite being struck twice. This woman's cultivation base, based on our multiple clashes of weapons, is at least at the level of Ling Xiaozue and Duga Chou at the most conservative estimate. Therefore, our initial assumption was that this cultivation base was the main reason Yun Yang had brought her to the battle. However, if it was only cultivation base, we could have dealt with it by setting up a countermeasure. In fact, we did the same, and the process was even smoother than we'd imagined. However, the final outcome was inconceivably bizarre. If Yun Yang is difficult to deal with, it's still reasonable, but the woman's bizarre backlash is the truly troublesome one. This matter can be said to be a pressing matter, difficult to deal with. Speaking of this, even Mr. Nian wore a worried expression, let alone the others. It was already exceptionally difficult to deal with someone with an unparalleled cultivation base, but she was also unafraid of being injured. It was simply impossible to deal with her. Not only was she unafraid of being injured, but she would also be struck by the backlash. Not only would she be unharmed, but she would also be able to kill the person who struck her. This was practically against the rules. However, this unimaginable, unbelievable, and bizarre situation was the truth. What was even worse was what the bystander had said. What's more frightening is that she is completely unscathed after being struck twice. The person whose neck was slashed and heart was pierced did not die, but the person who struck her was killed by the backlash. This was indeed appalling, but perhaps the other party had used some kind of mysterious art. The effect was immediate once or twice, but in reality there was still a hindrance. It was just that it was not obvious at the moment. However, the fact that she was completely unharmed shattered this notion. Even if the woman's protective art had its limits, and the consequences were far-reaching, could they break the other party's protective art, even if everyone on their side were to go all out? Furthermore, what if the other party's art did not have any flaws? What if it was an absolute defense and extreme backlash? Then there was really no other way. There was no possibility of killing this woman at all. She could not be killed, she could not be evaded, and she could not be beaten. The other party was truly unafraid of fighting, but afraid that they would not fight, afraid that they would not fight. This situation is the most disgusting. It's even more troublesome than Yun Yang. A Four Seasons Tower expert sighed with a contorted expression, deeply lamenting the helplessness of being unable to do anything. Chapter 840. Although Mr. Nian had long guessed that the helper Yun Yang had brought along was suspicious and would greatly affect the Four Seasons Tower, he did not expect it to be so troublesome. What was the concept of a terrifying enemy that could not be killed at all? Moreover, this enemy was the kind of mortal enemy who would not rest until one of them was dead and had a profound cultivation base. If the other party had been a man, Mr. Nyen could still try to drive a wedge between them and be driven by profit. But this was a woman, Yun Yang's woman. Moreover, it was the kind of woman who was dead set on Yun Yang. What method could be used to make a woman who was dead set on her man betray him on a battlefield of life and death? Perhaps there was no other way in this world, since the beginning of time. Now we can only use the stupidest method to deal with it. The winter bearer, who was dressed in white, frowned and said dryly, "Split into two and separate the two of them. Brothers on one side, fight Yun Yang with your life, and end this as soon as possible. As for the other side, we'll try to trap the woman." It's understandable to fight with your life. But how do we trap the woman? Try. It's easier said than done. Another person asked. The woman's cultivation base is profound, and her demonic defensive skill is even more bizarre. But her actual combat experience is still lacking. This is something we can try to apply. The trapping method I'm thinking of is that we won't initiate an attack, but will passively take the attack with our advantage of manpower. Our only goal is to prevent this woman from escaping the encirclement. The winter bearer looked bitter as he said, "I know this method is too passive, like we're meat on the chopping block, but this is the only targeted tactic I can think of. The woman's counterattack is indeed powerful, but I believe that her proactive attack won't be accompanied by the extreme counterattack. Otherwise, it wouldn't just be 2 people who died just now, but 4 of them. Then we're still not going to be punching bags." Everyone chuckled bitterly. They could not attack, and could only be beaten to trap a pinnacle expert. Insisting that she would not be able to escape the encirclement, such a strategy was absurd and utterly unreasonable. However, there was only one way left now. The experts felt extremely aggrieved, but there was nothing they could do, facing someone who could only be beaten and could not attack. And the other party was a pinnacle expert. It was undoubtedly an extremely dangerous thing. The opponent's counterattack could definitely kill. But could the opponent's attack not kill? Even if they were made of steel, they wouldn't be able to withstand being beaten up like this. When the news of the final battle came, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. They had been fighting Supreme Cloud for so long, both openly and covertly. In fact, even when they were confident that victory was within their grasp, it was inevitable that they were tired and impatient. Now that there was finally a chance to settle the other party once and for all, they could not help but feel tired and impatient. What they had never expected was that when the time finally came, when they were finally faced with such an awkward situation, what the hell the brothers had been waiting for so excitedly, just to become human punching bags. Yun Yang's bearer Heaven said Yang, with that summer, bearer Yang. Yun Yun Yang, Chen Yang Yin, was that Yin? Yin Yin, was that not? Yang is Yang Yang Yang. Yin Yang Yang, Yin Yin, thousand Yin Yang Yang. Yin Yang was Yang. Everyone's body trembled, and their faces revealed expressions of disbelief. But then they came to a sudden realization. I see. This lady is the residence of 9 Supremes incarnation? The residence of 9 Supremes has become a person? A woman at that. This is really unbelievable. Even so, the force of the counterattack is too terrifying. It's inexplicable. It's no wonder the residence of 9 Supremes vanished into thin air. But how is this possible? Those who had seen Ji Lingxi looked as if they were dreaming, especially those who had seen her before. That slender figure, that pretty face, that head of hair, that alluring willow swaying in the wind, was it actually a house? How could a house turn into a person? You must be King kidding me. If that's the case, this Supreme Cloud has found a house to be his wife. Another person looked incredulous. A house? How does he CK it? This. Another person looked aggrieved. Why do you care how he ket it? The current situation is how we're going to deal with the crushing force of this house. How we're going to trap this house, and not be crushed to death by it. I think you're worrying too much. The person frowned and chuckled bitterly. I just feel that this Supreme Cloud's appetite is very strange. Everyone exchanged glances when they heard him. Their strange and aggrieved thoughts should have been filled with melancholy and frustration, but they were strangely tinged with a hint of mirth instead. Mr. Nian sighed and said with a frown, "We're already facing a great calamity. I can't believe all of you can still worry about such strange things. You're all King experienced martial artists who have no regard for life or death." He pinched the space between his brows, his head throbbing with a headache. "I have a plan." Summer Bearer stood up. The group perked up. "What is it?" "Use heavy weapons, heavy hidden weapons. Leave as soon as you make contact, don't linger. Take turns to ambush him. Don't give him any time to rest." Everyone's eyes shone. This sounded like a great idea. Also, rearrange the formation and make the fog thicker. It'll be easier to ambush him. Mr. Nian frowned and pondered carefully. This is a feasible plan. But everyone must remember that you can only strike once and retreat immediately. No one is allowed to linger. Yes, if the other party can't help but pursue us, it'll be our chance to separate the two of them. We'll use the tactic of mutual destruction and end the battle quickly. Even if a few of us die in one go, we must kill Supreme Cloud in the shortest time possible after they're separated. As for the woman, we can ignore her. Kill Supreme Cloud and our mission will be accomplished. Yes, move at once. Yin Yang, who was dressed in purple, moved forward in the thick fog without any attempt to conceal himself. He was at ease, as if he was taking a stroll in his own backyard, no different from his usual carefree self. Yin Yang was not putting on an act. There had never been a moment where he felt so clearly how powerful he was. It was a monstrous confidence that he could slay any enemy, no matter how strong they were. Along the way, Yin Yang had been cautious, constantly reminding himself that he was too weak, and that he could be killed by the enemy at any time. Chapter 841. It was this sense of vigilance that had risen in his heart countless times that spurred him to not let go of any room for improvement in his cultivation, to move forward with all his might. He tried his best to obtain resources, to cultivate his martial arts skills, to practice his saber skills perhaps. It was this constant vigilance that stemmed from this thought that made him use all means to conceal his existence. Along the way, he had used his intelligence to deal with the enemies he encountered to the greatest extent. It was to the extent that he barely had a few direct confrontations with his enemies after such a long period of time. He had kept a low profile for so long. Now that the divine weapon was unsheathed, the world would tremble in fear. This was not him speaking incoherently after achieving his goal. It was a display of his self-worth and absolute confidence. A lifetime of resourcefulness, the mountains fall. He buried himself in refining his divine weapon. He did not speak of the secular world for 3 years. The unsheathing of his treasured saber shocks heaven and earth. Many years later, Supreme Cloud's story spread throughout the world. His experience of hiding his edge during these years was spread to Tianxian along with novels. Wu Ying, who was then the Minister of War and the Grand Commandant of the Board of War, broke his habit of remaining silent for many years and composed a poem while he was drunk. Both of them stood side by side, leaving their names in the annals of history, lasting for generations to come. Beside him was Jilingxi, but her expression was more relaxed than Yun Yang's. The Four Seasons Tower that had initially weighed on both of their hearts and regarded them as formidable foes was now nothing to be worried about. After the battle just now, their confidence in themselves had skyrocketed to a shocking level. "Oh, Tianxian Cliff," Yin Yang sighed softly. "My brothers are all here, watching me kill the Four Seasons Tower's men one by one. I can totally feel how happy and comforted they are right now." Jilingxi smiled and said, "Didn't you say that a few of them are still alive? It's not good if they're all here watching us feel happy and comforted. At least, I don't want Big Brother's spirit to be here. I don't want to miss the day when I can reunite with him." Yin Yang sighed softly. "You've misinterpreted my thoughts. Perhaps we're in different parts of the world now, walking different paths, but have our hearts ever been separated? The emotions I'm feeling now are only from the fact that I haven't seen them appear before me alive." A voice interrupted abruptly. "I didn't expect Lord Supreme Cloud to be such a sentimental person. It's a pity that the battlefield is fraught with danger and survival is a matter of life and death. However, If Supreme Cloud really wishes to see them again, it's not a difficult task. As long as this humble one sends Lord Supreme Cloud on a journey, you'll be able to see them right away. There's no need to spend a long time reminiscing about them. Yun Yang turned around abruptly and raised his hand. A ray of saber light lashed out like a bolt of lightning. There was a loud dang sound, followed by a shockwave. A long laugh rang out, and the person who spoke quickly retreated. He saw a cold light fly over from another direction. Yun Yang blocked it with his saber. With a loud clang, the divine edge buzzed and an oddly shaped concealed weapon, about half a foot long, fell to the ground. Not only was the concealed weapon unique in shape, the force attached to it was not weak either. Even with Yin Yang's current cultivation base, he was still shaken by the impact. Furthermore, this concealed weapon was only the beginning, or rather, the prelude to a secret weapon baptism. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. For a moment, all sorts of strange concealed weapons flew in from all directions. The ones who launched the concealed weapons were extremely careful, leaving as soon as they made contact, and never staying where they were. Each attack was heavy and forceful, as if they had given it their all. Furthermore, the concealed weapons used by these people were all extremely heavy, none of them less than a caddy. Such heavy concealed weapons were infused with the mystical skill of pinnacle martial artists of this world. The force was simply earth-shattering. Along with this wave of heavy concealed weapons, there were also people who were looking for an opening to attack from the front. The weapons these people used were also different from others. Other than thick iron rods and thick padeos, there were also relatively bulky iron maces and the like. There was even one person who was wielding an incomparably large iron chisel. Most of the weapons used by this wave of attackers were not divine weapons, nor were they weapons that they were proficient in. However, they had one advantage: thick, heavy, hard. This prerequisite ensured that they were sturdy enough to take a beating. Wielding such heavy weapons in addition to the support of mystical qi, even Yun Yang's divine edge would not be able to cut or destroy them so easily. And this kind of attack, every moment continued, did not stop for a moment, did not stop for a moment, did not stop at all. The attacks were endless. There were at least one or even several attacks in a split second, but the Four Seasons Tower's experts did not actually show themselves. They maintained the core tactic of leaving after a single strike and retreating immediately. Whether it was effective or not, all the attacks were launched without warning. In addition, the attacks were only directed at Yun Yang, not harming Jilingxi at all. The clanging sounds were like metal being hammered, ringing incessantly. Yun Yang was focused on dealing with the attacks, unable to care about anything else. He had thought that the Four Seasons Tower's attacks would only last for a while. After all, it was impossible for them to kill him. However, he did not expect the other party to carry on without a break. There seemed to be no stopping at all. Such a stalemate lasted for a whole day before the attacks slowed down slightly, but they were still coming. Yun Yang's heart was as clear as a mirror. So this was the Four Seasons Tower's plan. The other party has attacked you no less than 10,000 times throughout the day. It should be at least this number. Jilingxi looked at Yun Yang with worry in her eyes. It looks like they plan to exhaust you to death. Yun Yang's face was flushed, a rare sight. His breathing was labored as well. Even though his cultivation base was unparalleled, and he had Emmy's help, he still felt exhausted after withstanding the attacks for an entire day. It was difficult for him to cope with the attacks that had been going on non-stop. The Four Seasons Tower's reputation isn't just built on their overwhelming combat power. It's predictable that they would use targeted attacks when their strategy is not going their way. I think they might not be limited to such tactics. After all, the cycle of such tactics is too long. I think their ultimate goal is to exhaust my mystical qi as much as possible, and they'll probably have other tactics after that. Yin Yang panted and said, I'll be tired if I keep fighting like this, but they won't have it easy either. They might be even more tired than I am. Chapter 842. Jilingxi said in surprise. But why do I feel that this is already the best tactic against you? You basically haven't counterattacked throughout the entire day. Isn't this already an unwinnable position? An unwinnable position can also be an undefeatable position. It's impossible for them to exhaust me to death with such a tactic. Yin Yang smiled faintly. Think about it. I stand still and make sure that I don't lose. Although I can't win, I can't lose either. The other party, on the other hand, has to choose which direction to advance and retreat to, and they have to use their full strength in every attack. The energy they expend is a few times more than mine. My current cultivation base is higher than most of them. How can I be exhausted to death? If this tactic could really work, do you think there would be such an opening now? Jilingxi smiled. Then why don't you choose to attack first? Although the other party's attacks are intense, there have been a few openings throughout the day. Although those openings were fleeting, they were real. If we had aimed and attacked, it wouldn't be difficult to kill one or two of them. Because if we were to attack first, we would be falling into their trap instead. Yin Yang smiled faintly. I can almost be sure that the ultimate goal of their battle today is to make us unable to endure it and attack first. Only then will they have the chance to separate us and defeat us one by one. The other side obviously values you very much, and they're even helpless, which is why they're passively using this completely inefficient tactic. But if their plan succeeds, we'll be split into two, and they won't have to worry about you anymore. They only need to use the strength of a few people to restrain you, and then they can concentrate all their strength to kill me in the shortest amount of time possible. Yin Yang smiled faintly. As long as they kill me, they don't even need to care about you anymore. You can just leave. Your existence doesn't affect the overall situation. You can't shake the colossus that is the Four Seasons Tower. Do you understand now? This is the fundamental reason why they're using such an exhausting tactic. Yin Yang spoke to Jilingxi as he fended off the ever-present attacks. Although he was not at ease, he was still able to handle the situation with ease. Yin Yang had spoken openly. He did not intentionally lower his voice, nor did he use telepathy. He had just said it out loud in a straightforward manner. Therefore, not only did Jilingxi hear these words clearly, even the experts of the Four Seasons Tower, who were hiding in the dark, could hear them clearly. This was the Four Seasons Tower's ultimate goal. Yin Yang had hit the nail on the head. As Yin Yang's speech came to an end, the Four Seasons Tower's attacking rhythm was suddenly disrupted. In the next quarter of an hour, the attacks had completely disappeared. What you said just now wasn't meant for me to hear, was it? Jilingxi smiled sweetly. Yin Yang chuckled. How is it not for you? I'm answering your deliberate question just now. Jilingxi chuckled as well. Of course we have to explain to them. Otherwise, they'll think that they've fallen into their trap. Yin Yang said, Mr. Nian's stratagem isn't limited to this. He must have a backup plan. He won't let me get away with it so easily, so I must be more vigilant next. Jilingxi nodded. What Yin Yang had said earlier had obviously exposed the Four Seasons Tower's wishful thinking. Therefore, there was no further action in the quarter of an hour that followed. However, the rhythm of the attacks that followed was far more explosive than before. It was still the same as before. It had not changed. Instead, it had intensified. Countless heavy weapons rained down on Yin Yang like a torrential downpour. Jilingxi was rather annoyed. Why was it that after exposing the enemy's plan, not only did they not change their strategy, but they continued to carry it out even more intensely? This was illogical. The Four Seasons Tower's experts continued to exert pressure on the Four Seasons Tower with their frequent attacks. It was to the extent that after someone had muttered something, intentionally or otherwise, they simply turned into countless boulders that came crashing down. The area of attack was much larger than before. Naturally, they could no longer care about avoiding Jilingxi. They came crashing down without a care for the consequences or the cost. However, what surprised the Four Seasons Tower's men was that when the boulders hit Jilingxi, the boulders did not return to the person who had launched the attack despite being turned into dust from the recoil. It was obvious that the force that the boulders could withstand was too limited, and the counterattack was too strong. Before the recoil could be formed, the boulders had already turned into dust. In spite of this, the Four Seasons Tower's men were unprecedentedly elated. They thought that they had found the right way to subdue Jilingxi. So every boulder that came crashing down was massive, like a small hill. Super experts like the Four Seasons Tower had infused the boulders with a considerable amount of mystical qi and smashed them down viciously. It was not just one person. There were at least 20 people fighting in the same way at the same time. The combined force of the attack was earth-shattering. In spite of this, the attackers still insisted on not showing themselves, maintaining their initial conservative strategy. After the attack, regardless of whether it was successful or not, they would retreat to their original positions, not giving the enemy a chance to retaliate. Maintain the established strategy and exhaust Supreme Cloud to death. So what if you've seen through the tower leader's scheme? Just because you've seen through it doesn't mean that you can handle it. There are so many of us working together. Can't we exhaust Supreme Cloud to death? It had to be said that such a shameless method of fighting had put Yin Yang in a difficult position. Indeed, this was the most effective and targeted way to deal with Yin Yang at the moment. Retreating immediately after the attack, Yin Yang would not be able to do anything to these people, no matter how capable he was. After all, even if it was a face-to-face battle, Yin Yang would need a few strikes to find a chance to finish off one of them. What more when there was a momentary gap in the attacks? The attacking pattern from all directions was the same. As long as he gave chase, even if he succeeded, he would definitely be cut off from Jilingxi's coordination. The result was obviously what the Four Seasons Tower had been hoping for. Boom, boom, boom. The endless attacks were relentless. Ranged close and high, there was no loophole in the attack. This kind of scene that absolutely should not have appeared in a battle between peak experts. But it continued to play out in an unusually strange way here, one after another. Seeing that the other party's attacks were continuing, Yin Yang and Jilingxi could not help changing their strategy as well, taking turns to defend themselves. Each of them would last for a quarter of an hour, before switching to another person to fight for some time to catch their breath. After a day, both of them were not injured, but they were covered in dust and their mystical qi was severely depleted. Yet the other party showed no signs of stopping, as if they planned to continue this single tactic until the end of time. Both of their expressions subconsciously turned grim. Could such a simple tactic really restrain them and cause the previous advantageous situation to be completely gone? You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.